And for those who enjoy this channel and would love to support us financially, please feel free to hit that donate link. We'd greatly appreciate it. God bless. Hey everybody, it's Standing for Truth. What you are about to watch is the new and improved flood model, followed by 2 epic debates on the global flood. Enjoy!
The events of Noah's flood are laid out in Scripture. Though different theories exist on exactly how the event occurred, the problem I see is that the theories are so busy competing with one another that they lack the ability to see how well they work in conjunction with one another. In this video, you will see a conglomeration of many models which together all take care of the potential issues that critics might bring forward. The story of Noah's flood exists around the world. Cultures and people everywhere have told stories of it. But rather than just use that as evidence, let's use physical evidence instead. Here's the question. When did the supercontinent known as Pangaea break to form the continents that we see today? What initially happened was the moon circling the Earth was pulling constantly at the Earth's crust, as it does today. However, before the flood occurred, the waters under the surface of the crust were building up in pressure because of this magnetic pull. Unable to withstand, the fountains of the great deep broke forth. When the mid-Atlantic ridge broke open, the new continents formed their own breakaway plates, which sank as the waters rushed out. This lowered the already minimal mountains that were on the Pangaea continent. According to Genesis, the Garden of Eden was a lush paradise, one for eternal life, worldwide vegetarianism, and complete harmony with our Creator, mankind, and the beast of the field. There was no bloodshed, disease, or even death. Neither plants nor trees even had thorns or thistles. Man was created to live forever. It was only sin that brought death into the world and broke apart this harmony. This is what is referred to as the fall. We disobeyed God and ate the forbidden fruit. From that time and on, sickness, death, and disease has entered the world, mutations building up every generation, leading slowly to man's demise. All the while, people blaming God for cancer, while it was man's rebellion that led to this. The universe and Earth itself began to decay. And within just 2,000 years after the fall of man, humanity had turned so corrupt and so wicked that God sent the flood as a judgment against us, for God saw that the wickedness of man was great, and that every imagination of the thoughts of his heart was only evil continuously. And God said to Noah, "The end of all flesh has come before me, for the earth is filled with violence through them. And behold, I will destroy them with the earth." God instructed Noah to make an ark, a word that means box or chest, to specific dimensions, materials, and construction. And Noah did according to all that the Lord commanded him. And Noah and his family entered the ark, along with 2 of every kind of land animal. And then, in the 600th year of Noah's life, in the 2nd month and the 17th day of the month, the fountains of the great deep broke forth, and the windows of heaven were opened. These 2 events occurring began the first day of a series of events that changed the history of Earth and mankind itself. Giant rifts or tears ran thousands of miles across the planet. This is where the fountains of the great deep broke forth, jetting it into the atmosphere, along with massive amounts of stones and debris from the Earth's crust. All of these things would have been bombarding the canopy that surrounded the Earth, reflecting them back into the Earth's surface, causing even more destruction and turmoil. Until eventually, one of the projectiles will be strong enough to fracture and break apart the firmament. And the water fell back to the earth as intense global rain. The moon itself bears witness of this, as the moon does not rotate, yet what faces us shows clear evidence of bombardment from the very projectiles shot out from the earth during the flood. And we also have evidence for this as well. Ask yourself, where was Earth's oldest rock found? That's right, it was found on the moon during the Apollo mission. The evidence that the global flood brought on the Ice Age is abundant. One such example is rapid freezing. Reports describe the apparent near-instant freezing of a flowing river found buried in the frozen ground with fish frozen in place. Rivers do not freeze instantly, they freeze from the top down. The ice insulates the flowing water below, which prevents complete freezing. Here's another great report. 50 oxen were found, trapped in a remote frozen river. They were found attempting to cross when the river froze instantly. It froze them in place, alive, and they were unable to escape. How could a river freeze so quickly that a large, powerful animal could not exit in time, an entire herd of them? And what were they running from? Other findings in the Arctic also indicate rapid freezing. You see, it was a lush, temperate region, not a frozen wasteland from an ice age that was lasting thousands of years. The evidence for this is everywhere. Barren Axel Heiberg Island and Ellesmere Islands have been discovered to harbor a vast array of temperate animals and vegetation, which are now buried under the snow. Note that some animals recovered are burrowing animals that could not dig into rock-hard permafrost. Others are cold-blooded. Large trees were also found. Even more recently, giant camels have been found up in the north as well. In fact, vast frozen, non-fossilized forests that once thrived in the now barren Arctic Circle continue to surface as summer runoff erodes and releases the timber from the frozen muck. Driftwood of large non-native trees released from the seafloor still washes up on the shores of remote islands north of Siberia. Northward flowing rivers erode the muck below and see driftwood collect along their shores as it is carried out to sea. Because there are almost no trees growing now at these latitudes, the natives use these trees for fuel and building material and for burning. Oil drilling in northern Alaska commonly penetrates what is described as a flattened, unfossilized forest under hundreds of feet of frozen muck. There is a glaring problem with this. The frozen trees are not native to the Arctic. These tree species only grow in comparative forest thousands of miles to the south, where it is tropical and warm, proving that this region was also tropical and warm before the flood hit. But the problem is more than just the cold temperatures. These trees need a certain amount of sunlight just to live. And these latitudes do not provide sunlight for these trees to ever have grown. Even if the temperatures were right, there is a reason that these trees show such barren landscapes. Trees do not do well there. The Antarctic also reveals similar evidence that the climate was much warmer. Large deposits of coal and oil indicate large forests, and life lived there at one time. Dinosaur fossils also indicate warmer climate. Remember, these indications of rapid and permanent freezing of temperate to tropical flora and fauna are spread over 2 continents. and the type of flora recovered could never grow at the extreme latitudes they are found in. So simple climate change cannot account for what we observe. Therefore, any theory must explain how these plants grew and how they received the solar light from the sun to support them. The evolutionary theory fails 100% in this area. Only the global flood theory provides an answer to this. So, how did it get so cold so fast during the late summer? If the poles were warm, what happened? How did plants get sunlight? How did it stay cold for hundreds of years? The answer to the first question is cold hail. During the early stages of the flood, as the fountains of the great deep burst forth and shot water high above the atmosphere, some of the water laden with sediment soon froze as it radiated heat into super cold space. Above the atmosphere, temperatures are well below negative 150 degrees Fahrenheit. When the water reached this area, these frozen droplets were supercooled well below normal freezing and were transformed into muddy hail, which fell back down, blanketing vast areas in thick blankets of extremely cold hail. These warm climates were quickly transformed in hours. The dense sediments trapped in the hail caused it to sink to the bottom of any of the bodies of water on the earth. The heat from even flowing rivers were quickly absorbed by this super cold hail, and some rivers froze from the bottom up, trapping fish and crossing animals quickly frozen in place. So muddy hail can explain the extreme cold. Well, what about the woolly mammoth? We're told that these were Arctic creatures, evolved for the cold. Let's remove fact from fiction, shall we? The fiction is that they lived in a cold Arctic climate, and that's what they evolved for. What does their DNA show? That they're related to the Indian elephant. They say that they have a layer of fat for warmth, yet fat is only indicated from abundance of food supply. They don't have blubber. They have fat, like humans do, a subcutaneous layer of fat, and it goes up based on what we eat, not where we live. The mammoth so-called wool is nothing but hair, just like on an ape. Do apes live in the tropics, or do they live in the frozen tundra? The answer should be obvious. When a fluid expands, it cools greatly. Any remaining heat that was left over after the fountains of the great deep projected water into the upper atmosphere and turned it to ice would have been dumped into space, because space is the perfect heat sink. The great speeds at which the fountains flow mean that there would be little time for heat transfer with the atmosphere as it raced past. Even with some steam formation, Noah was located far away from the mid-Atlantic ridge anyway. So the hot air near any fountain would have dissipated far before reaching him, because air is a very poor conductor of heat. Let me explain. Consider that after you pass Earth's atmosphere, temperature plummets to negative 150 degrees Fahrenheit and lower. So any air that would be beside the fountains that was heated and pulled up with the flow would have a tendency to lose speed, fall away, and radiate any gained heat long before it flowed back down. Another thing to consider is that as the canopy collapsed during the flood, the atmosphere now would be expanding, causing a cooling worldwide effect, including reduction in air pressure and worldwide rain. Holding down a button on a can of hairspray, you can feel the can getting cooler. So expanding the air would reduce the temperature of the Earth and negate any effects of rising temperature. And also consider the canopy was only 9 miles up, not 60 where the top of the atmosphere is today. So the numbers that people were throwing around is all moot. And in reality, the numbers actually do show that they can be shot up 60 miles. Next, tectonic shifting caused massive mud-filled tsunamis to speed across deep ocean floors, then on the shallow ocean floors, killing everything in their path. The first megasequence wipes out mostly shallow marine habitats. Fossils show that the first 3 megasequences buried the shallow seas that were filled with marine life, as these deposits have almost no trees or land animals in them. Yet we know that all 3 megasequences covered similar environments across North and South America, including Africa, the 3 continents mapped so far. Another significant lesson was taken from the Japan tsunami of 2011, published in the Journal of Marine Geology. Though the area with the highest record tsunami waves of 20 meters was just west of Kasinuma Bay, the sand that these huge waves deposited on land was still only a mere 30 centimeters thick. 20 days after the horrible tsunami hit the port, emergency surveys were conducted in the bay to make sure that ships were able to enter. The initial survey did verify that ships could safely transit in the bay, but they made an unexpected discovery. Large sand dunes had been formed by the tsunami in the seabed. The dunes were typically 6 feet high, 20 meters long, in water 15 meters deep. They refer to these underwater dunes as sand waves. Old Earth geologists specifically argue that sand waves cannot form quickly, nor in fast currents. Therefore, they can get away with saying that sand waves found in the geologic column represents deep time. And that way, they can exclude a watery catastrophe, especially on the scale of a global flood. We see multiple surprises. Not only did sand waves form fast, with a fast current, they formed in surprisingly deep water. So every assumption that evolutionists make is completely wrong with the observable evidence. So sand wave formation can be made during a global flood. So now, all these things that these evolutionists have said debunked the global flood are now confirmation of Noah's flood. Then, by the 40th day of the flood, this is when the Absorica megasequences began hitting. The map showed that this is when things became much worse. This is when all of the land masses start to be submerged by the flood waters. Rather than the conventional model that has the sea floor spreading slowly, this runaway subduction actually happened quickly, moving at about 5 miles per hour. As the diving ocean plates subducting under the land, they push down the continental edges and then release them, creating tsunami cycles that blanket the continents. Exactly the same how tsunamis today happen, but only more intense and frequent. For example, the most powerful earthquake ever recorded in Japan was a magnitude 9.1 that occurred in 2011. This earthquake was caused by an undersea megathrust, about 45 miles east of the Japanese coast. At the center, there was a 160-foot slip between the overriding plate that was part of Japan and the underlying Pacific plate. The sea bottom rose about 23 feet when the vault unlocked, and the resulting earthquake triggered a devastating tsunami that was 133 feet above sea level and traveled inland for about 6 miles. The tsunamis occurring during the flood, however, were much different, with the ocean ridge bursting open rapidly and pushing the ocean floor under land continents on a worldwide scale. Tsunamis were happening in cycles, several every hour, and with long stretches of subduction zones active at the same time. The incoming phase of a tsunami has a much higher speed and is highly turbulent, which keeps the sediment in suspension, but it leaves behind layers of sediment as it slows down in the retreating phase. This cycle repeats several times every hour during the first 40-day inundation period of the flood. First entombing the shallow marine life, followed by land creatures in different habitats and elevations, leaving behind what we see today in the fossil record. These types of tsunamis have even occurred in recent history, such as the tsunami caused by slipping ocean plates that hit the coast of Washington in 1700 and left behind multiple layers representing each wave of the tsunami. Recent seismic technology actually allows us to investigate whether this type of rapid subduction occurred. Sure enough, these scans reveal a ring of unexpectedly cold rock at the bottom of the mantle, beneath the subduction zones. And while the evidence shows that this rapid subduction occurred, critics still have a problem with the heat generated from this. So let's answer this now. What I believe they just don't understand is that while subduction is occurring quickly, heat from this friction is being produced. They consider this the heat problem. However, what they don't realize is that because the icy hail that brought on this ice age and global reduction of temperatures, freezing lakes, and reducing the ocean's temperature greatly, the heat generated would not be a problem whatsoever. The oceans would have absorbed this heat easily. It would be like pouring liquid lava into your pool. It would do nothing to change the temperature of that pool. The severity and elevation of this stage of the flood is why the first land creatures and plants start showing up in the fossil record, laid down by the Absorica megasequence. Entire ecosystems are buried in enormous deposits that later turn into coal, such as the extensive Appalachian coal beds. In fact, the US has over 7 trillion tons of coal reserves. But where did it come from? While we know that dead plant material being sandwiched between sediments is the cause, we know that we don't have enough vegetation on the Earth to produce that much. This proves that the pre-flood world was mostly covered by lush vegetation, and the rising flood waters and tsunamis were necessary to sweep over the lands and cover this vegetation to form the coal that we now see in this world today. Noah's flood is the only explanation. The fact that over a dozen states in the United States are filled with dinosaur fossils buried under heaps of mud also attests to the flood. In fact, geologists have found a temporarily exposed dinosaur peninsula where the dinosaurs made their last stand, now buried there along with lake and sea life, transported by the massive waves that they could not outrun. The earlier flood deposits, the first 3 megasequences, do not seem to have deposited much material. Only a few hundred yards of sediment remain, and in many places, no deposition is left at all. Deposits thousands of feet thick occur east and west of this temporarily exposed peninsula that extends from Minnesota all the way down to New Mexico. Now buried across it are pre-flood wet plants and animals, including dinosaurs, turtles, frogs, fish, and many birds. Thousands of dinosaur trackways up and down this peninsula, plus similar temporarily exposed low areas of other continents, prove that dying dinosaurs and other hardy track makers were fighting for their life, wading through heavy mud and sediments and water that was rising to try and kill them. Another piece of evidence, we have what was called a dinosaur stampede of fossil footprints in Australia, presumed to have been made on land. The tracks were recently reinterpreted to have been made in water, with many of the tracks being made by swimming dinosaurs. The report came out in the January 8th Journal of Vertebrate Paleontology, documenting a fossil site in Western Australia, where many of the tracks are nothing more than scratch marks from what was obviously a dinosaur, being buoyed up by the water, clawing at the dirt as it swam along. This is one of many tracks found there and around the world. But all dinosaur tracks have water somewhat involved. Every single one of the dinosaur track sites were made in what best can be described as tidal flats. Jenny McGuire and Deborah Mickelson of Colorado University at Boulder presented a paper at the 2005 GSA documenting what appeared to be a trail of dinosaur tracks from a dinosaur walking and getting buoyed up by the water, more and more losing contact with the seafloor. However, the drawing that they depicted is not the reality of what happened whatsoever. This is more evolutionist storytelling and blatant lies to your face. The fossil footprints are in the middle of a series of rock layers. According to Steno's stratigraphic principles laid out in the 1600s and still adhered to today, it would be assumed that those layers were laid down horizontally. This wasn't some seashore. The principles of initial horizontality, strata either perpendicular to the horizon or inclined to the horizon, were at one time parallel to the horizon, and nobody disagrees with this. Therefore, these tracks were not made by some dinosaur walking into the sea, but rather the dinosaur was on flat ground in what is called a tidal flat. And as the dinosaur was happily walking along, the water came in and buoyed up the dinosaur until it lost contact with the ground. This is powerful evidence that Noah's flood was true, not some dinosaur as they portray walking into the sea, especially in light of the fact that other dinosaur tracks were found in that area that were not swimming, meaning they outran the floodwaters in that area, as where this one did not. There's more evidence for this in Glen Rose, Texas. The late Cretaceous rock of Glen Rose, Texas, famous today for its so-called human footprints with dinosaur tracks, that layer is acknowledged by the evolutionary community as a tidal flat. Except that huge tidal flat covers a huge portion of North America. That layer has countless clam burrows from clams that were obviously buried alive, catastrophically, by mud. Dinosaurs walked in that mud, more layers were laid down during the tidal waves, then the clams attempted to burrow their way out through those layers. The clams are found by the millions, possibly billions, all buried alive in the closed position, just a few layers above the dinosaur footprints. Now tell me, do you think that that was accomplished over millions of years, or a giant water catastrophe? The evidence is best explained, and I would dare say only explained, by Noah's flood. Then the massive Zuni megasequence hits. The Absaroka and Zuni megasequences are the most severe because the continental plates began to move more quickly from the original Pangea-like supercontinent configuration to where they are today. With oceanic rifting and plate subduction increasing dramatically and the continents traveling apart quickly, the tsunami-like waves began washing across the western North America while virtually no sedimentation is occurring in the east. When coming up over the Dinosaur Peninsula, the Zuni catastrophically buried dinosaurs in the Morrison Formation, a 13-state area encompassing over 700,000 square miles. This Jurassic unit includes at least 141 massive dinosaur bone graveyards, where dinosaurs like the Tamarasaurus, Diplodocus, Apatosaurus, Stegosaurus, and Allosaurus are found. The Cretaceous layers like the Hill Creek Formation are found on top of the Jurassic and holds hundreds of mass boneyards, containing several different types of dinosaurs, such as the Tyrannosaurus rex, Triceratops, Centrosaurus, and Ammontosaurus, that had been living in different ecosystems, yet all buried by the Zuni megasequence. The Zuni was so massive and fast that it engulfed entire regions with mud, burying giant creatures like this Tyrannosaurus rex under 50 feet of mud. It was entombed so quickly that it preserved blood cells, blood vessels, and bone cells. Ask yourself, how much water does it take to bury a living Tyrannosaurus rex under 50 feet of mud? The Dinosaur National Monument in Utah contains thousands of visible bones from 11 kinds of dinosaurs that were buried in a jumbled mass in the Morrison Formation, together with crocodiles, turtles, frogs, clams, and lizards. Again, ask yourself what type of event would cause different land animals with millions of clams all to be buried in the same area. When the Dinosaur Peninsula floods over completely, large herds of dinosaurs are entombed in massive fossil graveyards in the Upper Cretaceous system found in northern Wyoming, Montana, and Alberta, Canada. The dinosaurs had tried to escape by fleeing north as waters advanced from the south, explaining this massive graveyard in northern Montana that's over 1.2 miles long and contains 30 million fossil fragments, representing over 10,000 adult Myosaur that were simultaneously buried. In this entire collection of bones, not a single baby was ever found. That's right, every single one of these 10,000 Myosaura were between 9 and 23 feet long. This proves that the adult dinosaurs were fleeing for their lives and left their young behind. Just 170 miles northeast of this location is one of the largest dinosaur graveyards in the world, one that even secular scientists admit that was caused by a watery catastrophe. thousands of centrosaurs that are buried in 14 mega bone beds over an entire square mile, which is nearly 500 football fields. A massive herd of these creatures, thousands of them, were simultaneously buried in mud by Noah's flood. Just 45 miles west from this location is yet another massive flood deposit, and this one even has 49 different species of dinosaurs in it, buried along with turtles, crocodiles, fish, flying reptiles, birds, and small mammals. What type of disaster could bury nearly 50 different species that would never be near each other, and many other types of animals, including marine life, all together in mass graves? These mass burial sites are common in the United States. For example, at this dinosaur dig site in Wyoming, where a 1 meter thick layer of mudstone stretches for 80 acres with over 1 million bones buried in a graded, sorted bed where big bones are found at the bottom and little bones are found on top. The only way to develop a graded bed like this is by a catastrophic process that transports these bones and deposits them during a single event. Large flying creatures like pterodactyls were able to fly to escape the rising floodwaters, delaying their demise until the later stages of the flood. The fossil record shows that they are buried in many different layers all over the world. Widespread volcanism was also involved in finishing off the dinosaurs, as many of these massive graves are literally packed with volcanic ash that in many cases was mixed with water when it encapsulated the dinosaurs in their tombs. One section of the Morrison Formation, called the Brushy Basin Member, spreads across 5 states and includes over 4,000 cubic miles of volcanic materials without a single volcano in the Morrison Formation. Geologists believe this material had to be carried all the way from volcanoes on the west coast, volcanoes that were created by the magma rising from the subducting ocean crust plunging under the land. Today, these subduction zones form the Ring of Fire, responsible for over 90% of our earthquakes. The Bible records that on the 150th day of the flood, God made a wind to pass over the earth. The water started to recede. The fountains of the deep and the windows of heaven were stopped, and the rain from heaven was restrained. Now enters the final mega sequence, the Tejas. Here, after the water peaked over the top of the highest mountains of the pre-flood world, they began to rush off the continents, eroding and reworking some of the deposits laid down in the previous mega sequences, especially carving away at the Zuni deposits. This final sequence appears to be different than the others because there was a reversal in flow direction as the waters began to sheet off of the continents. This flow reversal transported much of the fossils deposited earlier off the highest uplands, spreading them towards the edges of the continents, and the evidence points to the Tejas draining the flood waters southward, off of the US towards the Gulf of Mexico, with a sheet wash pattern all at once. This is why we find massive sand deposits in the deep water off the Gulf of Mexico. Billions of barrels of oil have been discovered there, with much of it found within a massive 1,100 foot thick bed of pure sand in over 7,000 feet of water, over 200 miles offshore. In addition, plants swept off the pre-flood land formed massive coal beds, such as in the Powder River Basin of Wyoming and Montana. These Tejas layers contain the largest coal deposits in North America that currently supply over 40% of the coal in the United States. Some of these stacked coal beds are up to 200 feet thick, and areas that are over 60 miles long by 60 miles wide. The sheer volume of plant material required to form such a massive layer of coal testifies to catastrophic circumstances. The massive runoff that began with the Tejas may also explain the lack of human fossils in the rock record. Any residual human remains left buried and earlier deposits were totally destroyed by the erosive retreating floodwaters, in line with God's promise to wipe man from the face of the earth. Any residual remains were ground up and spread in all directions over great distances by the Tejas, lessening the likelihood of finding any human fossil remains. Because humans were impacted earlier on by the flood's violence, Erosion in the Tejas sequence would have affected the strata beneath, wiping away even traces of human remains buried in earlier layers. This is also why we hardly find any primate fossils. They're extremely rare. Matter of fact, the first one to ever be found was in 2005, and it was just a few teeth. When God stopped the fountains of the great deep on day 150, the new ocean surface began cooling, allowing floodwaters to lower as they sheeted off the continents into the new ocean basins. Psalms 104 describes the mountains being raised at the end of the flood, and the waters draining down the valleys and off the new land surfaces. The seafloor rifting process and the resulting mountain forming process explains why sea creatures are found on mountaintops all over the world, high above current sea levels. For the remaining 220 days of the flood, the water recedes from the earth and it dries out, allowing time for the earth to be replenished, with vegetation for the animals to eat when they eventually come off the ark. This year-long catastrophe left behind a vast number of proofs that, quite frankly, make its occurrence obvious. First, we have the staggering volume of fossil-bearing sedimentary rocks around the world, over 1 mile thick on average, including billions of dead things buried in rock layers laid down by water all over the earth. And the sediment that they are found in lies above sea level. What sort of water process could place so much sediment above sea level, on top of the land surfaces? Another clue is the vast horizontal extent of individual sediment layers, with little or no erosional channeling between successive layers. What sort of transport and depositional process could conceivably generate such uniform layers over such vast horizontal distances? Many of these layered beds are separated by bedding planes on the scale of inches to feet, a feature so common that if you stop to think about how it happened, it's as if the sediment is being deposited in pulses in a repeating manner, with each pulse producing a thin layer commonly found around the world. The flood tsunamis provide this perfect explanation, and it happens so quickly. There was no time between the deposition layers for surviving critters to burrow into the ground and turn them over. This is known as bioturbation. This is another major problem for long-scale evolution. You see, when living creatures burrow into the ground, they leave behind evidence that they did this. Traces that we should be able to see. These geologic layers of supposed ecosystems should be filled with evidence of bioturbation. Yet the evidence is not there, proving that these layers are not even hundreds of years old, let alone millions. The matter of fact, there was not enough time between each layer forming for these burrowing creatures to perform this task. You see, if each layer was an ecosystem and represents thousands or millions of years, then the evidence of bioturbation would be everywhere worldwide. But since we see no evidence of burrowing creatures between these layers, this proves two things. It proves that these layers were not laid down slowly over long periods of time, and two, it proves that it was laid down quickly during the flood of Noah when tsunamis were striking rapidly, exactly like the new physical evidence shows. When we look close at the fossil record, we see layers containing mass fossil graveyards and mass burial of catastrophic proportions. Remember, the flood started in the ocean. This is why we see the fossil record laid out like it is, with bottom-dwelling ocean life on the bottom and higher land animals on top. This is why we also find fossilized trilobite trails in layers supposedly millions of years older than the actual trilobite that made the trail. Let that sink in for a moment. So basically, all that happened were these trilobites were running up as the mud was flowing in, wave after wave from the tsunami, and they were leaving behind their prints as they died in the higher layers, not able to outrun the mud. And this is down the line. We find fossil bird prints before we find fossils of birds. We find fossil prints of dinosaurs before we find dinosaurs. Here are fossil footprints of an amphibian, but the only date they find amphibian fossils in are 15 million years later, higher up in the fossil record. Think about it. Trilobites, coral, clams, brachiopods, they would be the first to die because they can't escape. For example, when we go to the Grand Canyon and we look at fossil stromatolites, they're in the layers below the flood rocks. So we are not surprised to find that some of the domes are stacked up in a linear structure that look like a reef. There was an ancient reef system that made these slime mats building these domes that protected a lagoon near the coast of the pre-flood continent, similar to how they do today. When the flood came, it buried that pre-flood reef and fossilized it perfectly, and it buried the creatures that were in that lagoon before the waters rose up to cover the continents. Again, we see evidence of quickly buried history. We find fossilized raindrops, ripples from water, footprints going through geological layers of time that would be impossible if these layers were laid down over millions of years. All of this evidence proves Noah's flood, not million years of evolution. You see, Charles Lyell invented the geologic column, not because of the evidence, but because he had a clear agenda to do so. In his words, it was to free the science of Moses. Even Darwin acknowledged the inconsistencies of geology. He admitted not seeing what should be expected everywhere. Stephen Jay Gould admitted the same thing in 1980. This is well over 100 years after Darwin admitted the same thing. To their dismay, David Raup agreed. He stated, "Well, we know we are now about 120 years after Darwin, and the knowledge of the fossil record has been greatly expanded. The record of evolution is still surprisingly jerky, and ironically, we have even fewer examples of evolutionary transitions than we had in Darwin's time." Just lining things up on a table and telling a story is probably fun, especially for kids, but that's not science. The Grand Canyon is a great example for anybody to look at because it was fractured open, perhaps by an earthquake, and we can now see the layers easily. There is virtually no erosion features between the layers when they are inspected. Also, you will notice layers have eroded flat. Flat is not how ecosystems exist. We find no fossils of death in pre-flood rock layers because no catastrophic event took place to preserve them. It's only when we get to the great unconformity that life is visible in the fossil record. We can see the flood layer when we look around the world. Here it is at the Grand Canyon. It is referred to as the Tapeats Sandstone. Here is a map where you can trace it across North America. So, what do the rock layers show? Ocean waters flooded over all the continents. Evidence for this is obvious in that there are marine fossils on the top of all mountains on Earth. There is widespread, rapidly deposited rock layers. These rock layers can be traced all the way across continents and between them. This is evidence of a worldwide global event, not random ecosystems buried over eons of time. Even museums today acknowledge that dinosaur graveyards, marine life, trees, and more were all buried quickly by a catastrophic water event. The fossil layers are 100% evidence of Noah's flood. Lake Titicaca rests at 12,500 feet above sea level today, and its fresh water have ocean aquatic life, such as seahorses alive in it today, which are only ever found in the ocean. So, this is more physical evidence, yet again, of remnants from the worldwide flood. We can test the age of a lake another way, using observable rates other than the assumption of slow continental uplift, by what we call residence time. That is, the time it takes for water to be flushed from the lake and replaced by new water. It's also called lake retention time. It is the measurement of the age of the water within the lake. For example, this figure is the result of dividing the lake volume by the flow in and out of the lake. It expresses the amount of time taken for a substance introduced into a lake flow and out of it again. In this case, salt. And for Lake Titicaca, the residence time is around 1,343 years. Not even close to millions of years that they assume and tell the public. The fact is, Lake Titicaca was raised from sea level during Noah's flood and was flooded with the ocean water during that time. The surrounding land attests to this, but more on that next. Evidence from this is that Lake Titicaca drains to the south along Altiplano tableland, spreading out over the Desaguadero and towards Lake Hoopoe, and from there into large salt flats, proving that Lake Titicaca was once ocean water, as these salt flats are the basin from which Lake Titicaca flows. If what I'm saying is true, that the flood waters pushed ocean water into Lake Titicaca, then its drainage of salt would be quite noticeable in the downstream of the current lake's outflow, which it is. It's all along the Altiplano to the south, where it is accumulated along the slightly sloping tableland, which drops 400 feet from Lake Titicaca. Although Altiplano and around Lake Hoopoe lies the Salar de Uyuni, where even more salt is found. The last 4,300 years since the flood, the lake has been draining and losing salt and exchanging it for fresh water from rain and new rivers flowing into it, leaving the lake today mostly fresh water. Salt content is nearly all gone, but yet some still remains, proving that the lake is young and not millions of years old. It's impossible. We creationists know that it was filled with seawater during the time of the flood, and pushed into its current position during the formation of the Andes because of two tests. One is of its drainage basins, which prove it was once completely saltwater. Two, it has saltwater flora and fauna in and around the lake, with millions of fossil seashells on its shores. As you should know, water always finds the lowest recesses of ground and eventually settles. This lake is in a deep pit, which the water settled in after the flood receded. It's the only explanation that fits the evidence we see. And we also have evidence of a 1,000-year-old temple beneath the waters of the Lake Titicaca. An international group of archaeologists say that there is evidence of a temple 200 meters long and 50 meters wide, along with signs of a paved road. What other event deposits ocean water and aquatic life at 12,500 feet above sea level? You see, only theory evolution has for this is that the land must have been lifted up from sea level very slowly over millions of years. But their rescuing device for this fails because this supposed continental uplift puts this occurrence before humans supposedly evolved. You see, the gradual process of plate tectonics is so slow for the ground to lift 12,500 feet from sea level, the numbers just don't add up. But wait, what about the seahorses? How can seahorses adapt so quickly to such a new environment right after the flood? The answer lies in their genes. They lack or lost many of the genes which would have caused them to die otherwise. This is why we don't see a lot more ocean life in that lake today. They were unable to adapt to the salt content changing to fresh water. Pumapunku is in Bolivia. It is a perfect example of an antediluvian structure that we can see today. At 13,000 feet elevation, it's a South American ruin that predates the Mayans. This massive structure, with its advanced stonework, was destroyed in a flood. First of all, for a flood to reach 13,000 feet elevation is pretty incredible. Next, for a flood to move these megaton blocks and bury them in over 8 feet of mud is even more astounding. As you can see, many blocks are still covered to this day. Who knows how much is hidden from sight. The flood was so powerful that it not only buried the city, but was able to break apart these stones, and some of them were moved, weighing 131 metric tons. Since no rivers flow into Lake Titicaca, which is the nearest water source to Pumapunku, the only explanation for the submerged ruins by scientists is that a major flood occurred that reached over 2 miles above sea level. Only a global flood could do this. So this site is unique on Earth because it proves two important things. Our antediluvian ancestors were advanced in building and technology, and that a global flood occurred. The gray stones that you're seeing in this picture are from 44 miles away. the weight of the huge foundation blocks no one even knows. The flood of Noah lines up with the evidence that we see in the world today. Scientific investigation has revealed over 1,800 oil well boreholes from 4 different continents have all been compiled and mapped. The newly emerging map tracks the thickness and extent of each rock type as they were laid down by the flood. This research reveals the same 6 mega-sequences of each sedimentary rock deposit across multiple continents. Each megasequence contains a huge stack of rock, often with coarse-grained sandstone on the bottom, then finer-grained deposits like shale, then topped by limestones. Each megasequence is bounded above and below by flat, eroded surfaces called unconformities. What has been discovered from both a creationist as well as from a secular understanding is that much of the continental fossil record was already in place before any of the present-day ocean crust had come into existence. For example, all of the trilobite fossils had been deposited. Plus, all of the older coal deposits had already been formed before any of the present-day ocean crust had formed. Since in creationist understanding, the presence of fossils is a completely trustworthy indicator of Noah's flood, this means that much of the flood damage had already unfolded and it generated fossil-bearing sediments on the continental surface before any of the present-day ocean floor had appeared. It further implies that all of today's ocean floor formed since the onset of the flood during roughly the latter half of the cataclysm. It also means that all of the pre-flood ocean floor, plus the ocean floor formed during the earlier portion of the flood, must have been recycled into the Earth's interior during the cataclysm. These considerations indicate in a compelling way that rapid plate tectonics must have been a major aspect of the year-long flood catastrophe. This 6 megasequence worldwide flooding process perfectly set the stage for the subsequent Ice Age, and the creation of a completely new seafloor of hot lava as a consequence. This caused an abnormal amount of evaporation, and thus continuous rain that was likely worldwide. The volcanic activity that created the Ring of Fire would have spewed volumes of ash and aerosols high into the atmosphere, keeping the now frozen Earth in an ice age for hundreds of years to come. And sure enough, the first megasequence's rocks show a spike in volcanic activity and massive amounts of carbon dioxide. At this point, the newly formed continents drifted with great speeds, impacting one another, forming the mountains that we see in the world today. And, for the first time ever, new megasequence maps allow us to see how Noah's flood shaped our entire planet, just like the Bible said, including reconfiguring the continents. The ark came to rest on the mountains of Ararat on the 7th month of the 17th day of the month, and we now have evidence for this as well. We have discovered 2 amazing things. At the base of Mount Ararat, they discovered many drog stones. These gigantic stones are strewn about as though they were cut from the ship as the water receded. They are almost in a straight line pattern over 8 miles approaching the mountains. What these are for is counterbalance for a ship during huge waves. When they discovered these, they wanted to actually put this to the test and see that if a ship which weighed as much and was shaped like the Ark, would it withstand massive tidal waves. The results showed perfect results that line up exactly with what we would expect if Noah's Ark was true.
As the ship would roll and pitch, this would swing back and forth and up a little bit as the ship would pitch and roll, similar to a shock absorber in your car. And it's slowing down that momentum that would be created from that. So quite amazing that Noah's Ark would use that kind of technology.
The next amazing find is they found the cover that Noah placed over the Ark.
As far as we know, there's nothing else like this anywhere. Nobody's ever.
My goodness.
It's got crosses that are very faintly carved on it. You got a big one here. You got a small one right there. One here. You ever see? It looks like a little bit like pine bark.
It sounds like metal.
How would the anchor stone be wood?
This isn't an anchor stone.
Oh, I see.
At one point it says, and Noah came out of the ark and he took the cover off, or he threw the cover off. This is a rather unique thing. It has the appearance and the texture of some kind of a bark.
That is a cross.
What?
That is a cross.
There you go.
That is incredible.
It has a very hollow sound.
Very hollow. It sounds like metal.
Noah's flood represents the single most detailed event to ever take place in the Bible. The Apostle Peter and Jesus himself referred to the flood as an actual event. Remember, when things die on land, they get eaten or degrade rather fast. The odds of life dying to make the quantity of oil that we find on Earth today is best explained by the flood. It's also safe to say that the fossil record is not valid when we find evidence of discrepancies in the record. And guess what? We do. The upside-down geologic column in Pakistan is one such place. At the foot of the Karakoram Mountains in the Salt Range Formation, scientists have discovered fossilized plants and insects. From the evolutionary perspective, these remains belong to the upper part of the geological column. However, this formation lies beneath the Cambrian rock, which is dated back to over 400 million years. Discoveries such as these support the biblical version of the Earth's history, whereby the geological column is primarily a consequence of the global flood and its aftermath. It is no surprise that there is some order to the fossil record, such as sea creatures buried beneath land creatures, and mobile creatures such as birds near the top. But since, as the Salt Range Formation testifies, the ordered charts that adorn textbooks aren't always what they find in the field. Many results today have kicked evolution hard in the dirt. They have found complete stasis in the entire Pliocene era. We also know that the Ashley phosphate beds in North Carolina have found human bones and artifacts with dinosaurs together. Also remember that they also found modern-day birds dating back in the Cambrian rock layers, which supposedly evolved from dinosaurs. It's a total mess. Also consider that many of the biggest dinosaurs, such as the long-necked sauropods like Brachiosaurus, Titanosaurus, and Apatosaurus, would have eaten colossal amounts of vegetation. So why do we not find such abundance of these plants in the rocks containing these dinosaur fossils? Take for example the Morrison Formation in Montana. Even though this formation had yielded many dinosaur fossils, they're very scarce in vegetation. This phenomenon of missing vegetation doesn't just apply to dinosaurs or their rock layers. The Coconino Sandstone in the Grand Canyon has many animal trackways, but it's almost devoid of plants. These rocks tell us something profound about Earth's history. They suggest that these deposits laid down are not ecosystems buried over eons of time. Otherwise, we'd find more evidence as plants that the animals ate. Instead, the evidence fits nicely with the biblical model of early Earth's history, whereas these animals were transported and buried catastrophically during Noah's flood. Geologists have assumed and say that calm weather conditions are required for these settling processes to occur to form mudstone. Therefore, whenever they encounter mud deposits, they interpret them as forming in tranquil water environments. However, recent research published in the prestigious Journal of Science has turned this argument on its head. The researchers showed that mud deposits form from rapidly flowing water. Yet again, evolutionary theory fails when put to the test, and we have more evidence for a global flood. Evolutionary geologists claim that the Grand Canyon is the best and most complete geologic column on Earth. In the Canadian Museum of Nature in Ontario, Canada, there displays a massive diagram of the entire Grand Canyon, layer by layer. Within it shows huge breaks in time. 480 million years are missing between the basement and the Precambrian rocks. 330 million years are missing between the Unkar-Nankawit and the Chuar Formation. Somehow came and left without a trace, while the supergroup was supposed to have sat there for some 215 million years, during which time it was tilted. It was then cut by the Tapete Sandstone. That 215 million years also left not a shred of evidence. Right here it's expected that there was 155 million years of deposition of dirt which somehow all vanished without a trace of evidence of erosion. The remains of the Surprise Canyon Formation are supposed to represent 25 million years, again alleged to have eroded away while leaving behind no evidence. The top layer of Grand Canyon is claimed to be 270 million years old, and tourists now walk around on this layer. 270 million years of geological deposits have all been washed away. If we ignore Surprise Canyon Formation, we still have a total of 1,295,000,000 years of alleged geologic time that has gone missing. This all adds up to a staggering 81% of the geologic column, which is absent without a trace in what is described as surely the finest record of geological history anywhere on Earth. Rock layers were originally laid down horizontal and in the case of the Grand Canyon supergroup, they were tilted. Then they were cut off by erosion, then more layers laid down on top of that, horizontally. The rock layers do not conform, as you can see in the picture. So they suggested, evolutionists, that millions of years of time between when the supergroup was cut and when the layers were deposited. But there is no evidence of this 215 million years. You can argue all you want, but where's the evidence? If all these rock layers were laid down over millions of years, then why is there mysteriously no sediments laid down during that 215 million years on top of the cut supergroup? That's a lot of years to leave no evidence. I mean, think about it just for a second. Scientific studies have shown that sediments and even dust particles accumulate at even as low as 1 millimeter per year. At that rate, in 215 million years, that would accumulate 215,000 meters. That's over 700,000 feet of dust, debris, and ecosystem remnants that should be visible. There is no accumulation of these sediments of the alleged 215 million years of time at the unconformity layer. It's not the sediments that are missing, it's the time that's missing. Those who argue in favor of deep time are arguing from an absence of evidence. This is the same problem which occurred with the moon. When they first went to the moon, they had expected to land in multiple feet of dust accumulation because they expected the moon to be very old according to their deep time belief. When they landed, there were only a few inches of dust, proving exactly the same thing we're looking at with the fossil record. Everything is young. The Earth, the moon, and so is the Grand Canyon. More problems. If you look at flow number 1 in the chart, called the Cordinus basalt, it was dated using rubidium strontium isochron at 1.07 billion years old. Well, the other lava flow on top of it, flow number 2 in the chart, they found Native American pottery from a tribe that lived in that region between 1,000 and 1,200 years ago. So they knew how old the lava was. But using the same dating method, the dates returned at 1.34 billion years old on lava that we know was only around 1,000 years old. Contrary to what mainstream science wants you to think and believe, the dating methods give vastly different answers on the exact same rocks tested. The Grand Canyon itself is far more of a depiction of Noah's flood than it is uniformitarianism millions of years. The Empire Mountain Thrust Fault, just south of Tucson, Arizona, has Permian rocks on top of Cretaceous. What's especially interesting here is that the Cretaceous limestone is actually marble. It has undergone heating and pressure. It has changed its state because of this, and it's called metamorphosis. The Permian rocks have not experienced this heat and pressure, so this would actually indicate that the Cretaceous rocks are older than the Permian rocks. It further indicates that this out-of-order sequence is genuine. There is no overthrust here. As Burdick and Slusher documented back in 1969, no slick and slides, the Permian rocks had never been heated, and the rocks are locked together in what Burdick describes as a gear mesh fit. The rocks on the bottom were gouged out and then filled in with upper rocks. Obviously, the rocks did not slide relative to each other. So the rescuing device was that the rocks slid very slowly, and that is why the rocks didn't heat up or melt. And people mention the San Andreas Fault in California as an example of this. Well, the San Andreas Fault is not an overthrust. It is rocks that are sliding beside each other. So again, the gear mesh interlocking of the layers show that there was no movement between the layers. They're locked together. And this is secular scientists that agree to this. This isn't some creationist propaganda. These are not overthrust. They again are genuine sequences of reversals of the evolutionary timescale. Regardless, there are far more problems with the geologic column around the world. What I have presented to you are examples after examples and evidence after evidence that there are layers that are out of sequence and order, evolutionary speaking, that there are hundreds of these in North America alone. And even if there was just one of these, it would invalidate the geologic column and ultimately evolutionary theory. And because there are far more than just one, it also invalidates the geologic history of Earth, because these are supposed to be sequences of time, and if these are not sequences of time, they cannot use these for evidence of time. So in conclusion, these are not thrust faults. They are invalidations of the fictitious geologic column and deep time. I am astonished by the secular camp and the atheist who can see this evidence for themselves and deny it, and then get mad at us for showing them that they were lied to, and then they take the liar's side, defending them. It is complete insanity. But let's move on, I digress. Here's the most recent refinement. I love this, by the way. The Geological Society of America has claimed to be able to date parts of the scale with an accuracy of 0.05% accuracy. With such horrible precision, you shouldn't even question why they get dates wrong so often. Everything they feed the public is for the story they want to wield. They have no evidence. They make it up as they go along. There were at least 6 different skeletons found on the island of Guadeloupe in the 1800s. These skeletons were of completely modern human beings found in rocks dated 25 million years old, according to evolution. Yet according to evolutionary theory, humans haven't been around for at least 100 to 200,000 years. So now you probably know why these skeletons are not on display. One of them was on display at the British Museum of Natural History for over 50 years. That was until evolutionary theory took hold. In total, they excavated over 30,000 different bones and remains from that rock layer, which is dated at around 25 million years old. And like all evidence that comes out against evolutionary theory, it's buried in the basement of a museum to never be seen or heard from again. Are we to believe that the high Arctic had an animal diversity as diverse as the Serengeti, yet was covered in ice and snow and going through an ice age? This is completely ridiculous. In 1924, the Doheny Scientific Expedition ventured into the Havasu Canyon region of the Grand Canyon. The expedition report, penned by Samuel Hubbard, is a short but fascinating read. Now, this short expedition brought multiple enigmas to the attention of the scientific community. One discovery of fossil footprints was only briefly mentioned in the report, saying that Mr. Gilmore was at a loss to explain these carboniferous footprints. That Mr. Gilmore was Charles W. Gilmore, who gave more detail in the Smithsonian Miscellaneous Collections. Mr. Gilmore showed the footprints which bore a clear resemblance of horse footprints to the local Native Americans to see what they would say about them. The local Native Indians considered them to be the tracks of a band of wild horses. Now I want you to remember, Indians were natural trackers, and they could well identify any animal by its footprints, as their hunt depended on it. I would think they know what a horse footprint looked like, especially considering the fact that they owned and rode horses daily at this point. But the problem for evolutionism was that these footprints were out of place. They were in Permian rocks. The rocks were far too old, according to evolutionary theory. After all, many people still believe in the evolution of the horse. Although the sequence has been proven wrong years ago, it still appears in textbooks today. So I'm sure many listening still believe in this lie. But regardless, if you actually look at the charts, the first supposed ancestor of the horse supposedly had arisen 50 million years ago. But now these fossil footprints in the Grand Canyon, identical to those of modern-day horses, were in rocks that had been dated by evolutionists pushing 300 million years. Not only does this totally debunk horse evolution, but it puts modern horse way down at the bottom of the geologic timescale. Mr. Gilmore did the only thing he could have done, which was attempt to explain away the footprints as not even fossil footprints. A desperate rescue device. He tried to say that they were just stains in the rock. But decades later, the famous E.D. McKee visited the footprints and called them footprints. He said it's ridiculous to not call them footprints, but he labeled them as an unidentified vertebrate animal, or just an animal with 4 legs. Native Americans specifically told them these are horse tracks and they belong to that animal. The answer was so glaringly obvious, but you see, evolutionary theory does not permit the glaringly obvious conclusion. Evolutionary theory is not science, it is anti-science, ruling out possibilities and discoveries before they are even made, and anything that is contradictory to it. These horse fossil footprints rule out the anti-science theology, which is evolutionism. So in closing, horses supposedly evolved around 50 to 60 million years ago, yet we find horse tracks deeper than we do dinosaur tracks in the geologic column in the Grand Canyon. But it gets better. The Doheny expedition also documented the fascinating petroglyph of what they even labeled as a dinosaur. Hubbard commented that the photograph of the dinosaur petroglyph had been shown to a scientist of report, who then remarked, "It is not a dinosaur. It is impossible because we know that dinosaurs were extinct 12 million years before man appeared on the earth." Gotta love how they know it's a fact, even though the very date that they quote in this is so far off by any evolutionist standard today. Now, they tell people they know that dinosaurs became extinct 65 million years ago. Then when that date changes, the new one will be a fact. How about some biological evidence? We have this as well. Let's take a look at the L, M, and M haplogroups. These directly correlate with Noah's 3 sons that were on the ark. You see, if evolution were true, we would have a plethora of different haplogroups in the diversity of humans today, not just 3. This is evident when we look back in time at ancient man. We see tons of different haplogroups, but yet after the flood bottleneck, we only find 3. Why is that? It's obvious. All humans today derive from the 3 sons of Noah, and genetics proves it today. But it goes much further than just this. There's evidence everywhere. If Noah's Ark is true, and the Ark landed on the mountains of Ararat, and the people from it spread, then Ham's line went to Africa, which has always had the fastest birth rates. Half the women give birth before the age of 18, even today. And because of this, we can make predictions based on their mitochondrial DNA. We're going to find out that young Earth creationism is proven right yet again. Now, how about some of the typical complaints from the skeptic? Such as, what did Noah feed the animals on the ark? Where did they all go to the bathroom? Obviously, this would be a huge problem, would it not? Well, not really. The answer to this is quite simple, especially when we look at cold regions of the world like Sweden, where 7 months out of the year, it's so cold that the animals move under people's homes just to stay warm. To combat this, people are trying to keep them out, but it's nearly impossible, so people eventually just start spreading out a thin layer of wood shavings and peat moss with straw. It's called deep litter. It works by absorbing waste for up to 2 years, requiring no cleanup whatsoever, and it also absorbs smell. One of the reasons why it works so good is by not removing the waste, good microbes come and make their homes in the litter, and these microbes actually eat and break down the feces and consume unhealthy bacteria, leaving good bacteria behind. As for the animals and eating, well, remember, these are small animals. They're very young, and they have to be, because how else could they repopulate the earth if they're old? They might not even want to reproduce. So having very young, small animals on a ship would require not very much food. Also consider, nearly all animals can fall into a hibernation state to survive extreme colds or famines. A lot of things that you've seen in this video are genuine sequences of reversals of the evolutionary timescale. They invalidate it. And these reversals of alleged time demonstrate that there is no deep time. If there is no deep time, then there is no evolution. So if the geological record actually shows clearly the flood of Noah, and if evolution is wrong about that, and the Bible is right about that, then what else is the Bible right about? You see, Jesus talked about the worldwide flood as a fact. And in fact, he cited the flood as a judgment from God, and warned that in the last days it would be the same way, before the coming. And in the last days there would be a final warning, exactly the same as it was with Noah. For 120 years, Noah warned the people of earth of the judgment to come, and pointed to the ark, which was free salvation from the judgment to come. And Jesus warned us about the judgment to come. And Jesus is that salvation, and that kingdom is coming in the clouds, and every eye shall see it, and it will be too late, just as it was in the days of Noah, as the ark was sealed.
In 2014, a group of master's students at Leicester University decided to settle the question. They used the biblical measurements to calculate the size of the ark. Then they used the density of the water to figure buoyancy, and from there determined how much weight the ship could endure before sinking. Their conclusion? Noah could have put 70,000 animals on board and the ship would have floated.
And what do you know? It floats!
Awesome. Thanks so much there, Praise. We are live tonight on Standing for Truth, and we've got a really, really exciting one for you tonight. As a matter of fact, it's Dr. Ken Hovind's 200th debate, so we're going to make sure that this is one to remember. This much anticipated debate is most certainly, as I said, going to be one to remember. We've got Dr. Ken Hovind defending the Genesis flood, and Jordan here defending uniformitarianism. So before we get started with introductions, I'd like to thank both these men for giving us their time, because without them, debates like this would not be possible. So before I have my co-moderator here, Nephilim Free, go over the format and structure for the debate, I'd like to first start with brief introductions from both the debaters. We can start with Ken Hovind and then move on to Jordan. So if you guys would like to just give a brief explanation as to who you are and what you may be doing with your channels or ministries. So go ahead. We can start with you, Dr. Hovind.
Well, thank you for having me. My name's Ken Hovind. I taught high school science and math 15 years. I've been a Baptist preacher for 45 years. And I take the position the Bible is literally true and scientifically accurate, just like it's written. Jesus said the creation of Adam was the beginning, and I believe he was absolutely right, and that can be proven scientifically. I believe the flood in the days of Noah happened exactly like the Bible says, covered the whole world for about a year, and that explains all the fossils and every canyons and everything else we find. So I defend the position the Bible is true, and the evolution theory is ridiculously stupid. All right?
I appreciate that introduction, Dr. Hovind. Let's move on to Jordan. Go ahead.
I'm Jordan Karam. I am a mechanical and nuclear engineer. In my off time, I run a podcast with my buddy Jared, who's a former theologian. We're both atheists now. It's called Reason to Doubt, the number 2, because there are 2 of us. And we just talk about skepticism, how to examine evidence. We go over everything from alien abductions to anti-vaxxers, and with a mixture of science and profanity. So check us out, and really glad to be here. Glad you guys invited me.
Well, I appreciate that introduction from you as well, Jordan. We're happy to have you both, gentlemen. So let's get this party started. I'm going to hand it over to my co-moderator here, Nephilim Free. He's going to go over the format and structure of the debate, and we'll go from there. Go ahead, Neph.
Okay, so welcome everybody. This is going to be fun. We have a 1-hour debate, 10-minute openings, and 6-minute rebuttals, and then a 20-minute discussion period, and a short Q&A, and that's how it's going to roll. Now, Jordan has elected to go first, And so Jordan will take the floor first. He'll have 10 minutes for an opening statement, and we'll go ahead and just get started. So Jordan, my clock is set. When you begin speaking, I'll start the timer and we'll get this ball rolling.
Okay. Let me just get my screen set up here. Oops.
So just to recap, 10-minute opening statements, 6-minute rebuttals, 20-minute discussion, short closing, then Q&A.
All right, can you guys see my screen?
Yes.
Phenomenal. All right. Again, my name is Jordan, and I used to be a young Earth creationist. I grew up learning from Dr. Hovind and others like him, and I was absolutely convinced that his interpretation of Genesis was correct. Eventually, I escaped my echo chamber, and I was confronted with evidence that changed my mind. I now agree with virtually every expert in every relevant field. I am convinced that the geological and fossil record took millions of years to get to the condition that we see them in today, through consistent but not constant processes. Investigating claims about the past is not unlike being a detective. You come up with a model that explains the evidence and use it to make predictions that are either confirmed or not. If those predictions are confirmed, your model is more likely to be correct. Just as a detective can figure out who probably committed a murder, even if he didn't see it himself, we can figure out what probably happened in the past, even if we didn't see it. So today, I'm going to be looking at 3 pieces of evidence: radiometric dating, specific geological formations, and fossil sorting. I'll compare the predictions of my model versus the Hovind model, and we'll see which one holds up. So let's start with radiometric dating. Some elements in nature will decay, becoming a different isotope or element. The original isotope is called the parent, and the new isotope is called the daughter. Since we know how long it takes for the parent to decay, we can measure the ratio of parent to daughter and infer how long that amount of decay would have taken to happen. This process is called radiometric dating. The prediction of my model is that we should see evidence of advanced age in these ratios. In uranium-lead dating, geologists look at zircons, which are uranium-rich crystals. There are 2 isotopes of uranium that decay into 2 different isotopes of lead. This means that you have 2 independent measurements of age, one for each isotope. That gives you a nice self-check. If these ages agree, that's very unlikely to have happened randomly. But what if lead was in the crystal originally? Well, fortunately, there is an isotope of lead, lead-204, that doesn't come from radioactive decay. So it must have been there when the zircon was formed. By comparing the ratio of lead-204 to the other isotopes of lead in the whole rock, you can infer the initial conditions of the zircon. Because of this verification and built-in double check, this method is considered one of the most reliable by the scientific community. The prediction of my model is that these ratios would indicate ages in the millions of years, and of course that's precisely what we see. Now, creationists at the RATE project have attempted to save their model by arguing that half-lives were much shorter in the past and that all requisite decay happened during the flood. But you don't get to just change the half-life without consequences. Decreasing half-life increases radioactivity. Though the water from the flood may shield Noah and his family from some sources of radiation, the human body contains radioactive isotopes such as potassium-40 and carbon-14. The dose from those isotopes alone would be 117,000 millisieverts every hour, the equivalent of 20 nuclear bombs. Now, I'm not a doctor, but I don't think Noah's going to pull through that. And that's before you consider the heat from this radioactivity, which, according to creationists at the research, would have raised the surface temperature of the Earth to roughly 22,000 degrees Celsius. That's 3 times hotter than the sun. So that's one disconfirmed prediction for the flood. Next, let's go to geological formations. Despite what you may have heard, no geologist has ever said that every kind of rock takes millions of years to deposit. Some can accumulate quite quickly, like after a volcano erupts, but the Uniformitarian model would predict that others would in fact take a long time. So one example of that, underneath the Mediterranean Sea, there are vast deposits of salt 800 meters or more thick, with a total volume of more than 1 million cubic kilometers. These are huge deposits. They're comprised of several different types of salt: dolomite, gypsum, anhydrite, and halite, which paint a picture of varying conditions over time because the different types of salt require different conditions to form. This event, the event that formed all this, is called the Messinian salinity crisis. Geologists have written extensively on this topic for 40 years, but here's the broad strokes of what they think happened. The Strait of Gibraltar closed at some point 5.5 million years ago. So the Mediterranean stopped getting water from the Atlantic and began to evaporate. Shallow areas dried up completely, leaving large salt pans, while deep waters became progressively more brackish and salt precipitated onto the sea floor. This process was not linear, and regions of erosion can be seen where salts were washed away, followed by more accumulation on top. Depositing such vast quantities of salt with varying local conditions would take hundreds of thousands of years. They can't be explained using the flood model, at least I don't think so. But it matches perfectly with uniformitarian predictions. So that's 2 predictions down. Lastly, the order of the fossil record. So according to flood geology, fossils are the remains of creatures that were trapped in one single catastrophic flood event. To explain the apparent sorting of fossils, i.e. dinosaurs at the lower rocks, mammals at higher rocks, the methods proposed are hydraulic sorting, original location, and differential mobility stroke intelligence. This is great stuff for making specific predictions to test by, so let's start with that, beginning with hydraulic sorting. In fluids, denser objects fall faster, and larger objects fall slower due to greater drag. The flood prediction of hydraulic sorting is that creatures of roughly the same density will be sorted with larger specimens on top and smaller ones at the bottom. To test this, we can look at the ammonites. They were cephalopods similar to the modern-day nautilus. They had coiled shells ranging in sizes from as small as a thumbnail to 2.5 meters across. The shells also had an internal gas chamber that varied in complexity across species. So if it were hydraulically sorted, we would expect them to be sorted roughly by size. That prediction sadly doesn't match up with reality. What we actually see are small to medium ammonites all throughout the layers from the lowest to the highest. And in the highest layers, we have fossils that range from 10 millimeters to 4 feet. Now, this is not what hydraulic sorting predicts, but the ammonites are sorted by complexity. Ammonites with a simpler internal structure are found at the lowest layers, while those with a complex internal structure are found at the highest layers and never the other way around. This sorting regime matches perfectly with the uniformitarian model, where more complex structures didn't evolve until later. Next, original location. Often Dr. Hovind will pull out his fossil clam, which is a type of bivalve, and say that we generally find those at the bottom of the fossil record because they're already at the bottom of the sea when the flood happens, and so they'd be buried first, which makes sense. But bivalve fossils exist up and down the fossil record in every layer of sediment from the Devonian on up. And I have all the sources for that there at the bottom of the slide. Once again, this doesn't match the predictions of the flood model, but it's what we'd expect to see with uniformitarianism, where the layers represent deep time. And so bivalves existed throughout that time, so they exist throughout the layers. Incidentally, that doesn't fit hydraulic sorting either. The last mechanism is differential mobility stroke intelligence. According to Dr. Hovind, birds would be on top of the fossil record because they could fly above the water, but this doesn't make sense given the rest of our fossil record. For instance, pteranodons can fly. Why did they all choose to lay down and die with their dinosaur brethren instead of flying with the birds? We don't see angiosperms, which are flowering plants, until much higher layers of rock. Did all the magnolia trees gallop across the plains and outrun all of those animals? Did all the other angiosperms that currently grow in marshes and by rivers, did they collectively decide to sprout elsewhere? It doesn't seem to make much sense to me, but in a uniformitarian view, it makes a lot of sense. So let's put all of these 3 mechanisms together and look at the common mole. The mole seems pretty much doomed on every count. They're small and relatively streamlined, so they'd be hydraulically sorted lower. They aren't particularly fast or intelligent, so they wouldn't be able to run to high ground, and their habitat's about as low as you can get. They're already underground. All 3 flood predictions would put these creatures low on the fossil record. Yet the first mole fossils don't appear until the Eocene, which is one of the highest layers, above all kinds of plants, reptiles, and even other mammals. So that's 3 predictions and apparently 3 failures from the flood model. Now, this, of course, is just a tiny fraction of the total evidence in the field. There's the magnetic striping of the ocean floor, more radiometric dating methods, the entire field of evolutionary biology, et cetera, et cetera. But hopefully this gives you just a little glimpse, and it's enough to show a trend. Now, a disclaimer, I'm not a geologist, I'm not a paleontologist, a biologist, and as you can clearly see from these slides, I'm not an artist either. I'm a mechanical and nuclear engineer. But what that means is that both Dr. Hovind and myself are laymen on these topics. We're not experts, unless he has some education that I'm unaware of.
1 minute.
Cool, thanks. That's why I posted my sources on the slides, which I encourage you to check out for yourself to ensure that I'm not misrepresenting the science. It's very easy to come up with a story that sounds good, at first glance, particularly if your audience has no in-depth knowledge of the subject. It's much harder to present evidence that persuades relevant experts. So as we go on, I want you to listen to both of us very closely. Do we cite our sources? Are those sources peer-reviewed or scholarly, or are they just like blogs? Once the debate is done, check both of us. Make sure that both him and I are using our sources correctly, that we're accurately representing the research. In short, you should get your science from scientists. So I'm about done, so I'll just go ahead and see the rest of my time. Really looking forward to hearing what you have to say. Thanks.
All right. Thank you for that, Jordan. That was Jordan's opening statement. It's time for Dr. Hovind. Dr. Hovind, you have 10 minutes when you begin speaking.
All right. Well, thank you so much for coming, Jordan. I'm sorry to hear that you switched from being a young Earth creationist to believing you came from a rock 4.6 billion years ago. I think you jumped out of the frying pan into the fire on that one. I'm always curious why a person such as yourself, who claims to be an atheist, what do they offer as replacement for the biblical creation view? They seem to always be looking to pick holes in what the Bible says. And yet, if you look at the only alternative to a creator is the world made itself. So I would assume you have chosen to believe, capital B, believe, in the evolution theory. And the Big Bang the universe had to come from somewhere. So I think you would be wise to really honestly look and say, do I really believe that a mosquito and a whale have a common ancestor? You really believe that? I mean, hello, wake up, son. Anyway, so the 3 lines of evidence you gave are things you want to talk about. Dating, I cover that if we can during Q&A. Maybe I have a lot of stuff on all the different dating methods: carbon dating, potassium, argon, rubidium, strontium, lead 208. I don't understand what you're thumbing for me. Oh, okay. All the different dating methods are based on some very obvious assumptions, Jordan. How much was in it when it started? Has the decay rate always been the same? Has there been no contamination? Those cannot be proven. You could, in a court of law, no dating method in an honest court of law, if such a thing exists, none of them would hold up. They would all be thrown out saying, look, there are too many assumptions. You can't know the initial content. You can't know there's not been any contamination, and you cannot know the I forgot. Oh, hey, brother, come in, brother. People coming in all the time around here. So I think there are so many variables on this that it's just not wise to call it science. It's wise to call it a belief. You can believe that if you'd like. There have been numerous examples, and I give lots of them, and I'll call them up if you need them, where wild dates have been obtained from samples, but the samples really are dated based on they're bracketed first on the geologic column. And they've admitted this for many years. What happened in 1830, Charles Lyell, a lawyer from Scotland who hated the Bible, wrote a book called The Principles of Geology, volume 1, 2, and 3. I got them on the shelf here. I don't see them now, but they're here. Anyway, these are the books that greatly influenced Charles Darwin to give up his faith. Darwin had gone to school to be an Anglican preacher, majored in theology, the only degree he ever got. And when these books were written by Charles Lyell, Darwin took one of them with him, or maybe it was sent to him on the Beagle as they sailed around the world for 5 years collecting bugs and birds. But Darwin Charles Lyell really thought he was the cat's meow. I mean, he said, men of superior talent, he's talking about himself, who thought for themselves and were not blinded by authority. And Jordan, this is the same attitude you've picked up, okay, the scoffing attitude. False conclusions, futile reasoning, ancient doctrines. I'm sure you were taught in school that the Bible is an ancient goat herder's manual and all that stuff. I've heard all those things. And you rest on scriptural authority. And this is the kind of stuff they feed kids like you with going through school. And some of you swallow it, and I'm sorry. Page 41 of his book, he remarked of how much interest of religion as well as those of sound philosophy had suffered by mixing sacred writings with questions of physical science. And in your engineering training, I'm sure you're taught, physical science, the decay rates of these various objects: potassium, rubidium, strontium, lead 208, lead 206, carbon 14, etc. These decay rates are physical science, and they prove millions of years or tens of thousands. They prove the Bible wrong. That's what you were taught, and this was hammered into your head for probably years. Okay, Lyell said he reasoned philosophically against those who regarded a disordered state of Earth's crust as exhibiting signs of the wrath of God. This is a slap at Noah's flood, which is what you're going to do here tonight. And he said, if you believe the Bible, you have a religious prejudice. Lyell clearly said his goal was to free the science from Moses. In other words, get rid of the Bible explanation. Lyell's the primary guy who created what we call today the geologic column. It's been greatly modified, but you used it tonight. You got the Cretaceous, Jurassic, Triassic, Permian, Mississippian, Devonian, all that stuff. The geologic column can only be found one place in the world, and I think you should know that, Jordan. It's only found in the textbook. It's certainly not uniform all over the world. I mean, out of these layers, there may be a random shuffling where occasionally you find a little section, but then you got to, how do you know it's a Jurassic layer? What's the difference between Jurassic limestone and Permian limestone or Mississippian limestone? They're all limestone. They determine which one they call it by what types of fossils they're found in there. Pure circular reasoning. What happened in the early 1800s, each of these layers was given a name, like Jurassic Park. It was given an age, 70 million years ago, and it was given an index fossil. So they said, if you find this fossil in this layer, this will be called Jurassic, or Triassic, or Mississippian, or Devonian, or Silurian. The whole thing was made up in the 1830s. The geologic column, does it exist? There's a great article on creation.com, just accessed a couple months ago, saying, no, the geologic column does not exist. Now, it is a fact the Earth has many layers of rock. It's a fact Grand Canyon exists. I've been there many times, flown down in it, rafted in it, climbed up and down. The Grand Canyon exists. That's not a question. There's two options. It formed slowly by a little bit of water and lots of time, or it formed quickly by lots of water and a little bit of time. I know this, if you watch Dam Break at Dinosaur Adventureland, you'll see our little dam washed out in 7 minutes. Grand Canyon, if you plugged it up, that would take a lot of dirt, but if you plugged up Grand Canyon, lakes would back up on the north side that would be 5,000 feet deep. You're an engineer, you know the pressure 5,000 feet of water exerts. Once it starts going over the top, it's going to not only erode, it's going to be abrasive because it'll pick up sand, gravel, clay. It'll be liquid sandpaper. So you have erosion and abrasion, and you'd also have cavitation. Rapidly moving fluids, air or water, can create cavitation, a suction on the material around it. So I think there are numerous factors with rapidly moving water that would form Grand Canyon probably in a week or two, not millions a year. It is a washed out spillway. It's a breached dam. Now, it's a fact the Earth has layers of rock. I agree. I've seen them. Taught Earth Science 15 years. You guys believe that these layers form slowly and are different ages. And yet there's nice continuity, nice neat lines between them and polystrata fossils connecting them. I think it's ridiculous to believe those layers are millions of years different in age, but you can believe what you want. The creationist says, no, these layers are all from the flood in the days of Noah. And you guys who believe in evolution, believe, capital B, are constantly trying to erase this line and make your theory part of the fact. No, Jordan, it is a fact. The Earth has layers. It is not a fact. They're different ages by millions of years. The geologic column is actually the Bible for the evolutionist. You gave up on God's word to believe in a rock book. All these layers are different ages. It can only be found one place in the world, and that is the textbooks. I would like you to show me where I can go actually see and study this geologic column, and I'd like you to explain to me, why did they name the layers what they named them? If they find limestone and then limestone later and then limestone later, why did you name it Jurassic? Why not Mississippian limestone? It's because of the index fossils, and they know it. This textbook says if there were a column of sediments, unfortunately, no such column exists. There is no geologic column. It doesn't exist. They talk about the geologic strata and all these layers. This is what, if the geologic column existed in one place, it'd be 100 miles thick. This is line number 7 in my series of 45 lies in the textbooks you can see on drdino.com. So they said this article is detailed examination of the young Earth creationist claim that the geologic column does not exist. It is shown that the entire geologic column exists in North Dakota. Oh, so they found one place on this giant world where they think the layers happen to be in that order. Of course, there's going to be just through random shuffling. And again, I'd like to challenge, how did they decide what to call those layers? How did they decide this one is Mississippian, Devonian, Silurian? It's by the fossils. Anyway, hypersaline water, so I would talk about all this kind of stuff in my seminar. Okay, index fossils may have been found in order in some place, but that's a result of random shuffling. It's going to happen. I can shuffle decks of cards and fling them out 5 million times and eventually get all the aces together. Yeah, that's random shuffling. So my position is these layers of strata that you see, for instance, in Grand Canyon, all had to be deposited very rapidly for multiple reasons. One, they're nice, neat layers stacked on top of each other. If that layer sat there for 4 million years waiting for the next one, don't you think there'd be some erosion marks in between the layers?
51 seconds.
Is it going to rain once in a while in 4 million years? I got 1 minute left. Okay. So my position is just simply shaking of mud and sediments and stuff like that, hydrologic sorting, would create all the layers that we see on the Earth in a matter of less than a year. We have these things at our Dinosaur Adventureland, and come on down. Jordan, I'll give you a tour of the place. You can flip this over. There are 4 different densities of sand, black, dark blue, light blue, white, and it makes 100 layers every time you do it. Water does that kind of thing. The bent layers indicate rapid deposition. The smooth gravel, all over the world, gravel is rounded. We live in a gravel pit here. I'll give you 1 billion rocks if you want. They were in a rock tumbler called Noah's flood. So come on down. We'll be glad to explain all that to you from how the tide would have done rock tumbling all over the world. Anyway, go ahead.
Okay, thank you for that, Dr. Hovind. And we're into the 6-minute rebuttal period now. Jordan, you have 6 minutes to rebut, and your time begins when you start speaking.
All right, so Dr. Hovind spent a lot of time talking about this guy named Lyell, science from the 19th century, who was formative in the stratigraphy and the layers. I mean, that's awesome, but we don't base our science on people who lived in the 19th century. They may have started, but we stand on the shoulders of giants. So
yeah, you do.
I don't, I'm not going to defend his views or his arrogance because we've got plenty of work since then. So I'm going to focus on stuff that's more modern. In terms of replacing the biblical view, I replaced it with what I perceive to be the evidence. Talking about the Big Bang and whatnot is kind of off topic for this, but I have talked about it in other forums, and I'd be happy to do that. But I'm not going to go into that today. And just the dating assumptions. So it is true. Every model has assumptions. That's true of every model, whether it's creationist or not. Doesn't matter. All models have assumptions. Those assumptions may or may not be valid. You have to test them and ensure that they're valid before you want to use them. I gave reasons why the half-life has been constant. Physically speaking, it's not just that they hammered it and I just accepted and hit the I believe button on that. The reason that we can be confident the half-lives are constant, if the nucleus was a nickel, the nearest electron would be 3 miles away. The nucleus of especially heavy elements is very insulated from environmental pressures. So in the radioactive decay is mediated by the weak nuclear force, which is constant throughout the universe, or at least it appears to be so. So there's no real reason to think it would change. Now, there is one exception. That exception is electron capture. That is relevant for potassium dating, for instance. Because that is a method where the nearest electron falls into the nucleus, turns a proton into a neutron, emits a neutrino, and because it is based on the closeness of that electron that it impacts it, extremely high pressures have been shown, for instance, for beryllium-7 to change that dating or that the half-life by about 0.5%. And that's at pressures we'd experience miles and miles down, way deeper than we're doing any dating. So that assumption seems to be reasonable and supported. Initial conditions, different dates deal with that different ways. I talked about how uranium lead deals with it, with the non-radiogenic lead. You've got outgassing and then ways to deal with air. So we can get more into that later, but it's a known problem and it's a problem with solutions. If it didn't have solutions, we wouldn't do it. Non-contaminated, a lot of the times the contamination would actually make things younger. With uranium lead dating, for example, if the uranium were weathered away, it would stop decaying into lead. That would freeze the clock. So when we looked at it, it would be artificially young. A lot of the different dating methods are like that, so that doesn't really help. At least it may make the thing less accurate than we'd like. I mean, no method's going to be perfect. There's always error bars, but it certainly helps get rid of the 10,000-year-old age. For the types of layers, I am not a geologist, so I'm going to be relaying to you what I got from the experts. I don't claim any expertise in this field, so but what I've read from them in terms of the erosion marks, that's actually something that SFT hit me with when I debated with him, and I had to give the same kind of plea of ignorance. I looked into it, and apparently, according to geologists, there is evidence of erosion between layers. They're called unconformities. The one I think that you're most referencing is called a disconformity. According to the relevant literature, it's very difficult to recognize in a casual glance. So I defer to geologists and their expertise on that. But it is something that actually does happen. In terms of the way they named it, I don't know who was the creative guy who came up with the names. Probably that Lyle jerk, I guess. But it's my understanding, and I am not a geologist, so please do take these for the ravings of a drooling idiot. I think it's because of, you can follows Steno's principles of stratigraphy. Layers are laid down consecutively because you can't lay them on air, and so you can track layers over large areas. And then you can make a construct, which is helpful for learning the geological column. It's not intended to mean this is the column that exists anytime you dig in the ground. That's, of course, not what it means. It means that if there had been no erosion, if it had happened everywhere, this is what it would look like. But reality is, of course, way more complex than that. That's why they have to spend 10 years getting their doctorate to become experts. Talk about the queen lines. The queen lines are and sometimes an illusion. Look up disconformities. Polystrate fossils in the literature, they are called in situ fossils or T0 assemblages or upright fossils. There's a fantastic paper on this, 2011, by DeMichel and Falcon Lang, titled Pennsylvanian Fossil Forests and Growth Position. So look that up. It really breaks down exactly how it happens. So basically, these are fossils that go through several layers of mud. For most of them, it means that they were buried rapidly from a geological standpoint. But you can see coal seams, which is the forest floor. So it appears that they were there. You can see the root systems. But the cool thing about this, the reason that it doesn't appear was one single event, is you can see multiple, in some places in that paper they describe it, multiple trees on top of each other. So you have a tree, it's buried, it's fossilized, and a little bit higher you have another tree, and it's buried, and it's also fossilized, and a little bit later. So I'm not sure how a flood would account for that. And lastly, just the whole scoffing attitude thing. I don't consider myself superior. I used to be a young Earth creationist. I changed my mind because of evidence, and I'd be happy to change it back. I just want to know the truth. This appears to be the truth from my best estimate. But if I got different evidence, then I would change my mind. And I hope everyone would embrace that view. And that's it.
All right. Thank you for that, Jordan. Now, Dr. Hovind, it's your turn to have 6 minutes for rebuttal when you begin.
All right. Well, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Jordan, you mentioned they're difficult. The erosion marks between the layers are, you said, difficult to recognize. That's code word for only experts can find them. I have studied many of these layers. We have them here on our property. I live in a gravel pit. There are 7 layers of gravel that start here in Alabama and go to North Carolina. There are hundreds and probably maybe even thousands, but certainly hundreds of gravel pits between here and North Carolina, mining these same layers of gravel. Obviously, I think there was something huge that did that. And I don't know if you're aware of the stratigraphy work done in Colorado at the, I forget what it's called right now.
Propulsion Laboratory.
No, it wasn't Jet Propulsion Laboratory. Sorry. Anyway, when water's moving sideways, it'll drop off 6 or 8 or 10 layers simultaneously. So it'll look like the layers were deposited horizontally or vertically, but actually they're deposited horizontally, multiple layers. So you can actually get a layer at the bottom that's younger than a layer at the top, depending which way the water's flowing. And during Noah's flood, the tide would be flowing both directions. Now, I left off completely discussing fossils. I'm going to do my whack an atheist here in a few minutes when we're done. Tonight it's Richard Dawkins. Every Wednesday night on our YouTube, Kent Hovind Official, we do whack an atheist, like whack-a-mole, knock them back down. Richard, and I'll be glad to put you on the list if you'd like. And your friend, your other buddy. You know, why the profanities in there? Does that add intelligence or something? I don't know, but we'll see. Okay. Richard Dawkins says, show us your intermediate fossils, the skeptics say. There are plenty of intermediate fossils. That's what he said. Plenty of intermediate fossils. And I'll tell Richard tonight, and I'll tell you right now, fossils are not evidence for evolution. You cannot prove any fossil you find had any offspring. All you find are bones in the dirt. We have lots of fossils here. We have thousands of petrified clams in the closed position. Some of these are found on top of the Peruvian Andes Mountains. They're found on top of Mount Everest. When Edmund Hillary got there in 1953, they put their victory flag on top of the mountain. The top several hundred feet is petrified clams on top of Mount Everest. I think the flood model explains that pretty good. The Bible says toward the end of the flood, Psalm 104, the mountains arose, the valleys sank down. I believe the earth was completely covered in water, probably about a mile deep everywhere. Lots of stuff drowned, lots of fossils formed. And then during the last few months of the flood, the thin spots on the earth's crust would sink in, maybe a mile or two. The thicker spots would bounce up in response, like tipping a teeter-totter. And so the mountain ranges all over the world, it's interesting, the mountain ranges follow the coastline. The Rocky Mountains, the Pacific, the Appalachian Mountains, the North Atlantic, the Alps follow the Mediterranean. So I think the mountain ranges and the ocean basins formed at the same time because of the same feature. Sections of land would tip. I mean, if you get a 2,000 mile piece of land to tip 1 mile, we're talking 0.05%. So that would let the water rush off, and the rushing of the water would form the canyons through the soft mud very rapidly and bury lots of fossils. How many animals died today around the world? Like billions, and none are going to fossilize. But it's not hard to find fossils, Jordan. They're everywhere. Fossils are everywhere. So I think the best explanation for fossils at all is A, rapid burial in mud and preservation from decay long enough for them to be either replacement fossil with mineralization of the bone, or a casing, in the case of an impression fossil. But you cannot prove any fossil. I cannot prove this clam had any children. You can't, in a court of law, they throw it out and say, I'm sorry, you can't prove this had any children. Secondly, you cannot prove it had any fossil, it had any offspring that lived. It might have had children, but they all died. Thirdly, you could not prove any fossil in the world had any offspring that lived that were different. Why would who would the imaginary different offspring mate with? Let's suppose you do get a bone in the dirt that's able to produce something different than itself. Who is it going to marry? You got to get two at the same time of the opposite sex in the same place, and they got to find each other and be interested. And then you got to replace the whole population of other ones with those two new ones that have the new improved species, improvement. It's just not science. Secondly, why would anyone believe that bones in the dirt could do something no plant or animal today can do? Produce offspring that are different. No farmer's ever seen a cow produce a non-cow. Dogs, nobody's ever seen a dog produce a non-dog or a chicken produce a non-chicken. It's never been seen. So you have chosen to put your faith, your belief, in the completely unseen theory that animals can change to something else. Nobody's ever seen that. I feel sorry for you. I think you gave up the only thing that's logical, God's word, to accept something illogical. Last thing you said,
1 minute.
All models have assumptions. I agree. The creation model has assumptions. I assume there's a creator. I assume there was a worldwide flood. I think the evidence points that way. I cannot prove that in a court of law. And you cannot prove that mosquitoes and whales are related. You can believe that because of whatever reasons you want. And you can believe we all came from a dot of nothing 13.772 billion years ago, but it's not science. So my question would be very simple. Since neither creationists nor evolutionists can technically prove scientifically their point, why are we all forced to pay for your religion to be taught? Because evolution is a religious belief. You've chosen to believe it on faith. Nobody's ever seen a dog produce a non-dog. But you do believe a dog and a mosquito are related. It's fine. You can believe that. I don't care. I don't think it's science. I don't think it's smart. I don't think it's common sense. But I do object to paying to have the kids taught that like it is part of science. It's not part of science. Evolution should be taught in a religion class, if it should be taught at all. Okay, go ahead.
All right, thank you. That's Dr. Hoven's rebuttal period. Now we're going to have a 20-minute open discussion period, and after that we'll have our closing statements. So you guys have 20 minutes to talk. Let me set my timer for 20 minutes, and we'll have a nice cordial conversation about uniformitarianism or versus the flood. How's that? Starting now.
Sure. I just wanted to answer the whole profanity thing. Jared and I are both veterans, so we just can't help it. It just happens.
We'll see. We'll see if God accepts that excuse one day. I spent 9 years in prison. I heard plenty of profanity. To me, it shows stupidity, not intelligence. But go ahead.
You have to use it creatively.
You guys put things in your mouth I wouldn't hold in my hand, but that's all right.
Do you have anything you want to start with? We can roll from there if you want.
Well, maybe the layers. Well, you said you're not an expert in the geologic column, but I can show you pictures. Maybe you've seen my seminar of petrified trees standing up, running through two different seams of coal. I should call that up here, but I got 14,000 slides. But if you have a tree standing up, running through a seam of coal, 5 or 6 layers of rock, and then a different seam of coal. Up in North Alabama, they find a lot of them, the Mary Lee Formation and the Blue Creek Formation, both layers of coal. According to the theory, a forest has to grow. The trees have to get compacted, turn to coal over millions of years or some amount of time, and then more layers deposited on top, and then a whole new forest has to grow. And yet there are no roots into the layers below, none. And the tree, I'll just call it up here. The tree is connecting 2 layers. Let's see. geologic column. It's better if they ask the questions in the same order that I have my answers. That would help a lot.
Well, while you're pulling it up,
anyway,
the picture.
Polystrate fossils going through two different seams of coal, I think, completely negates the idea that you were taught that this can be answered. I don't think there's a possible answer for that other than all the layers formed in less than a year, which you would get. How many layers just formed on this thing in the last 10 minutes while I let it sit here?
So I'll give you
20?
the answer. That's my understanding, and I am not a geologist, so please get your geology from geologists. But my understanding would be that the tree would be buried at least part of the way, and that would cause the first coal seam eventually after it compacts. But all that's necessary for the tree to fossilize is that it's buried faster than it decays, and trees can last without decaying for sometimes years and decades. It depends on the tree and the conditions.
I agree.
So my understanding as a layman would be that you'd bury the original tree, another forest bed would begin to grow, and then being in a situation where it's likely to be buried, that's evidenced by it happening once, it gets buried again. And so you'd have the appearance of this tree buried once, buried however many times, and you'd have another coal seam buried again. That would be my understanding. How would that happen with a second coal seam, though, in the flood? Like, what would that represent?
Well, during the flood, you would get log mats as big as Texas floating back and forth across the ocean, being carried back and forth with the tide. I mean, the flood would rip up trillions of trees, and they would tend to float in log mats in the vertical position, a horizontal position. So as any log mat floats around, certain types of wood, or depending how bad it's fractured from being twisted out of the ground, will be waterlogged faster than others, and they'll sink to the bottom. Mount St. Helens has multiple layers forming at the bottom of Spirit Lake, and it had only been 40 years since the volcano erupted. Here's a petrified tree standing up, running through multiple layers. Here's a person standing next to a petrified tree. These layers that are running right up to the tree do not have any signs of being inclusion, being pushed into place, or being shifted in any way. The layers are nice, neat, smooth layers. I've been to see them in Yellowstone National Park. There are 27 layers of wood standing up, many of them broken off, like this one here, Yellowstone National Park. Petrified trees in the standing position. You can watch my video number 4. Here's the coal mine in North Alabama, where they find one of the guys who works there, Dr. Donald McDonald, Troy State University, wrote to me and said, "Can't we find them all the time?" He works in the coal mine, digging for the coal. There they are right there, digging out the seams of coal. He said, "You'll find petrified trees. Sometimes the tree is sitting right on top of a seam of coal, no roots whatsoever, just like sitting there." This one was running way up here, and the rest of it broke off. So the Mary Lee and the Blue Creek Formation are coal seams up in North Alabama here. We don't have any coal down here that I'm aware of, but in our gravel pit. But if you look at the fossils that are found, Don sent me this. He said, "Kent, we got fossil A, B, C, D, E, F, G, H. And if you put them all together, tree H runs up through the Mary Lee Formation. Tree A runs through the Blue Creek Formation. But yet they also both run through this layer in between. Hold it. That's scientific evidence that those layers had to form before either tree could decay completely, which would certainly be less than millions of years, maybe 10 or 20 years. Under mud, maybe preserved a little longer. Here's one that is running through a seam of coal at the bottom. This is in Tennessee. A different seam of coal at the top. And in between are these layers budded right up to it. Now, I know what you were taught. I was taught the same stuff. These layers form slowly over millions of years. First of all, they tell you the top layer is younger than the bottom layer. I say, stop right there. Think about it. Where's this top layer coming from? Outer space? All these layers were in this glass thing at the same time. They're sorted by hydrologic sorting, but you can't say the top layer is younger than the bottom layer.
All right, so
all the layers are the same age.
You've hit a lot of things, so let me try to hit some of them.
Go ahead.
So, trees don't decay immediately. All that's required is that they're buried before they decay, and I don't see why that would be an issue in my model. It just means that they have to be buried quickly, geologically speaking. You can have floods. There just don't need to be global floods. So I don't see why that's a particular issue. I would wonder why, if things are floating, so obviously plants float when there's a flood and whatnot, why we wouldn't see a bias of plants. Like, why do we have plants all throughout the fossil record? Why doesn't it appear that they were deposited selectively by floating? That would be a question. You hit a lot of stuff. I lost track of a lot of it. So
Yeah, I'm sorry.
it's okay. Yeah, so I don't know. I lost track of any other point you might have made if there's something I missed that you
Okay,
said.
let me object and say there's no such thing as a fossil record. There are fossils, lots of fossils. We have thousands in our museum, but there's not a record. None of them have a date stamped on them. None of them can talk. So somebody's putting their interpretation on them.
Yeah, but
they
that's
would
the
say
case.
this clam is found in the Jurassic layer, so therefore it is 70 million years old. It doesn't say 70 million on it. Somebody put their interpretation on it, and you can believe their interpretation if you'd like.
But that's
a
the case.
petrified clam it had to be buried alive. It's closed, Jordan. Clam.
That's first of all, that wouldn't be so you have to look at a model with its predictions, and
I agree.
Right. So it wouldn't be a prediction of my model, or when I say my, I mean the scientific community's, the uniformitarian model, that all the clams would suddenly spring open as soon as they die. I have a quote. The clams do open as the muscles relax, but if they were buried quickly, which fossils are evidence of being buried quicker than they could decay, Roger Portell, and the Invertebrate Paleontology Collections Director at the Florida Museum of Natural History, says as clams die, fine sediment and particles wash inside. As more sediment settles on top of the clams over time, they close, becoming excellent long-term storage containers. So what's happening is the clam is buried and dies. It starts to open, but sediment is being packed on top. That would tend to force it close in some cases. So having fossilized closed clams, say that 10 times fast, doesn't refute anything in my model. And it is definitely true that when I say fossil record, what I mean is the observation of these fossils as we present them and as have been ordered by paleontologists. You have to put an interpretation on evidence you see. So it's not a matter of proving. You only have proofs and math. What you need to do is test it to see if predictions are disconfirmed, and if the predictions are not disconfirmed, then the model is more likely to be true, subject to future evidence. So it doesn't bother me that I don't know. I don't expect to know. I expect to go with what's probable.
Okay. I would make a prediction that a log in the mud would probably decay in less than 100 years. I think it'd be hard-pressed to find any tree under mud for 100 years that is still intact, especially since many of them still have the bark on them. But in rolling back and forth, they saw with Mount St. Helens blowing all the trees into Spirit Lake. They said probably 20,000 trees got blown into Spirit Lake. When I was up there, my sister lives up near there. It's amazing what that volcano did. But those trees, every time the wind blows, they roll back and they slide back and forth on the water. The wind blows them to one end, back. So they're always rolling against each other. The bark rolled off pretty quickly and settled to the bottom. That's going to form a layer of coal. Coal can be made in the laboratory in a couple of weeks under heat and pressure. That's all you need to convert the cellulose into coal. It's just a different form of cellulose, basically, but which, of course, is greatly going to affect the carbon decay rate. But I would predict if we look at these trees with a magnifying glass where the layers meet the tree, there will be you will not find evidence of them being pushed in, intruded. You will find evidence of these layers being rapidly deposited. And I predict you will find the top layer is not rotted or decayed more than this layer. If it's stuck in the mud at the bottom and these layers form slowly, you would see if the top part is exposed for any amount of months or years, you're going to see more and more decay. The tree should be rotting coming in, should be getting smaller at the top, not just because of the way trees grow, but because of rotting wood, and that's not evidenced.
So
I'm not
a geologist, but I think I know how that would work. So as the trees being deposited, again, these layers can deposit quickly. So it's not that a quickly depositing layer invalidates my model. Some layers do deposit quite quickly. But if the tree rotted to the point when it's exposed that it wouldn't have any structural integrity, the next slide is going to shear that off. That's why you see these trees with a sheared top. That's exactly what happens. So the prediction, I mean, that's correct, but it doesn't invalidate the model. But again, I'm not a geologist, so my understanding of that is very limited. If I could talk about the half-lives, because you mentioned that a couple times. So what mechanism, aside from electron capture, which pressure can change, so setting that aside, what mechanism would change the half-lives for these other decay patterns and what evidence do you have of that being observed?
Well, I think we have all sorts of examples of things that are dated by the layer that they're found in, and then when they do carbon date them, or potassium, argon, or rubidium, strontium, they find wild errors. So which one are you going to count? Back in 1976, they knew from American Journal of Science, radiometric dating would not have been feasible if the geologic column had not been erected first. Oh, whoa, what's he saying here? You have to bracket the date you're looking for. If I took this to a university and said, how old is this clam? First question they would ask, where did you find it? What difference does that make where I found it? Take a piece of coal to any university and say, how old is this? Would you carbon date it? Because coal contains carbon. And you know full well, Jordan, if coal is 220 million years old, there'd be no carbon-14 left in it with a half-life of 5,730 years. But coal still contains carbon-14, doesn't it? It's not millions of years old. But the first question they're going to ask is, where did you find it? Like, what difference does that make where I found it? They have to bracket it first with the geologic column. This is pure circular reasoning, and a first grader can figure that out.
Fossils
have been, and go ahead.
Sorry, go ahead. Well, you have to determine the method to use in order to date it.
Now, stop and think what you're saying. You have to bracket the age by the geologic column to decide if you should use potassium or rubidium or strontium or lead-208 or lead. You're saying exactly what I pointed out. This is the hypocrisy of the whole thing.
Allow me to
speak. You
speak.
have to first decide how old.
Allow me to speak more precisely.
You can't decide.
Okay. So when I say you need to decide what method to use, I mean methods are expensive, and you just don't throw every method at every fossil because we'd run out of money. So it's kind of like if you found that fossil so far down, it would be a waste. Well, it'd be a waste of time to date a fossil with carbon dating anyway, because there's no carbon in it. But if you find something,
what if it contained carbon? Carbon dating costs about $500, if I recall.
You can test it, and if you find significant amounts of carbon that can't be explained by other sources, such as uranium decay, then you can publish those sources, and you'll revolutionize the dating world. I don't expect that'll happen. It's not like they're being dishonest by this bracketing. If you wanted to pay for all the different methods, and they often use different methods, then you can do that. It's not like they're hiding from it. It's just it's unreasonable to expect them to date every single sample with every single method.
Okay, are you aware of, is it Jack Horner or John Horner that has the museum in Montana? He has the dinosaur bone that was found with soft tissue still in it. He has it in his possession. A guy called him and they recorded the call. He said, Mr. Horner, would you please carbon date that dinosaur bone because it has soft tissue, which would still contain carbon. He said, no, I won't do it. They said, we'll pay you $20,000 if you will carbon date it. We'll pay for the testing, $2,000 or whatever it was. Plus, we'll pay $20,000 if you'll carbon date it. Just a donation to your museum. He said, no, I can't do that. He said, why not? He said, because we know it's too old. This is such blatant prejudice and blindness. It's got soft tissue. For heaven's sake, it's got carbon. He was offered $25,000 to carbon date it. What would be wrong with carbon dating a dinosaur bone?
It would destroy
it's too old.
Well, it would destroy parts of the sample. Old, right? It would destroy parts of the sample. As you know, samples that are that well preserved are extremely rare. So you're not just going to throw this sample in the trash. It doesn't make any sense. So, I mean, if you found the sample, you could do whatever you wanted with it. No one's going to stop you from doing it. But you can't expect to light this other guy's fossil on fire and him being okay with that. But you still haven't given me a way. Give me a mechanism by which these half-lives are going to change. What's your mechanism?
Well, there was an article published, I don't have it in front of me here, but a couple years ago, they took under extreme heat and pressure and got, I think it was, I forget which of the long dating methods, the long age ones, to decay in a few seconds. It went from 1.4 billion, I guess it'd be potassium to argon, whichever, if that's the right number. It instead of 1.4 billion years to go half of it to decay, just in a few seconds under heat and pressure. Would you agree that extreme heat and extreme pressure could influence all the dating methods?
No, because potassium argon dating decays by electron capture. As I mentioned earlier, that is shown to be slightly vulnerable to pressures. So setting that one aside, because pressures can affect the orbitals of electrons, so that dating method, got it. Setting that one aside.
So can temperature. So can temperature.
Okay.
Temperature can affect the orbitals of electrons. Go ahead.
Sure. So that method, setting it aside just for the sake of argument, what about all of the other methods? How are the half-lives of those changing? Since they are not shown to be vulnerable to temperature and pressure, and there's no reason we'd expect they would be.
Let's start with your assumption. Carbon-14 is not vulnerable to anything.
3 minutes,
Then date the dinosaur bone that they found with soft tissue in it. They found a dinosaur bone with soft. Several have been found. It's not like it's rare, and it doesn't take that much of the sample to test. It wouldn't destroy the whole fossil and set it on fire. They got a dinosaur bone with soft tissue in it. Take 2% of it, dedicate it to science, and you got a guy offering $20,000 donation to your museum. I tell you why Horner doesn't want to do it. It would destroy the evolution theory, because it would come back just a few thousand years old, because that's all carbon dating does. But if carbon-14 indeed decays to carbon-12 at a known half rate of 5,730 years, if that is indeed true, and indeed that bone is 70 million years old, there should be no carbon-14 left. I'll be willing to bet you $100, that's about all I can afford, that there's carbon-14 in that dinosaur bone.
If I had a dinosaur bone, to give you, Dr. Hovind, I'd give it to you. And I'd expect...
You would?
Yeah, I would. I just don't have one. I don't expect I'll get one. But
we
if I
have
do...
some fragments here.
I do, I'll give it to you. So I'd expect that test to come with some small amount of residual carbon from contaminants. And when you get below represented ages of 50,000 years or less, you're starting to get into the error bars. So that's not a significant amount of carbon. I would expect that there would be no statistically significant amount of carbon-14, unless
I will predict it'll have significant. I'll predict it'll have significant amounts of carbon-14, way beyond the error range. And I would predict if it was demonstrated that a dinosaur bone had carbon-14 still in it, significant amounts, and you could isolate all the contamination effects by digging down deep enough into the bone, into the marrow, someplace where it was not contaminated. And if it could be contaminated, how do you know all the other samples they've taken over the years were not contaminated? Why would you isolate one age and throw it out when let's throw them all out then?
By contamination, I mean no sample is going to be perfectly clean. You're going to have some level of contamination, but they have rigorous lab procedures, as I'm sure you know, to try to minimize that to the greatest extent possible. So if you ever find an offer on that, I'll throw in $100 of my own money to get that to happen. So I'm pretty confident. And if it isn't, I want to know.
Okay, I think you're correct. You really do want to know. I think you got taught something that drew you away from Christianity. I think you made a giant mistake. Now, all of this argument tonight, the geologic column and the carbon radioactive dating methods, is all about really one thing: great age. You guys have to get frantic when they start attacking the idea that the Earth is billions of years old, because without billions of years, your theory falls apart. But this is only the first hurdle you have to overcome.
That's
about the end of years for your frog to turn to a prince.
Gentlemen, that's about the end of the discussion period. Let's give each one of you 30 seconds to finish up your thoughts. Since Jordan, you began the discussion, give a 30-second summary of your thoughts in this discussion, 20-minute discussion period, and then we'll get Dr. Hovind to do the same thing, and then we'll move on from there.
Is this my closing statement?
No, our closing statements are to come. Just give a 30-second, overview of what your thoughts are on the discussion, and we'll give Dr. Hovind the same thing, and then we'll move to the.
I don't get frantic when someone comes with evidence that might contradict something I believe. I'm demonstrably willing to change my beliefs based on the evidence. So I don't get frantic. I just get interested. It's not about being able to prove something with 100% certainty. If you wait for 100%, you will never get anything. It's about what's probable, what's plausible, and just making the best predictions you can and being willing to change your mind. That's what it's all about.
Okay, Dr. Hovind, if you'd like, for 30 seconds, you can summarize your thoughts about the open discussion period, what you talked about, and then we'll move to closing statements.
Sure. I think it's pretty obvious that there are numerous examples where the carbon dating, none of the dating methods have been proven to work 100% of the time, or even they come up with some really wild dates, and they won't date that dinosaur bone because they know full well what'll happen. And the great age, which is really the whole tonight discussion is about, is essential for evolution. Just this one point, if it could be proven the Earth is not billions of years old, the entire evolution theory collapses in a heap. And they know it, and I know it. And they don't want that because they like evolution, because it gives them freedom from God's rules for, like they don't like the thou shalt not commit adultery and those kind of things. So that's really why they're frantic to hang on to this thing. So if you're really honest, Jordan, I think you are, we'll get you converted right back to young Earth creationist.
Cool.
Okay?
All right, so now it's time for closing statements. Nobody told me how long the closing statements would be.
It's short.
It's 5 minutes. Is that appropriate for you, fellas?
I'll just need a minute or two.
Okay, well, how about, a minute or two? Well, that would be awful short. Maybe Dr. Hovind might like to use more than a minute or
he could,
two.
If he wants it, good. I don't care.
Forget the clock. Just let him go as long as he wants.
Oh, okay.
Go ahead.
Okay.
You want me to go first? So traditionally in closing, you relitigate the arguments and try to get in some parting jabs or whatever. But this is YouTube, so you can just replay the debate if you want to hear what my arguments were. Instead, I just want to ask, I want all the listeners to ask yourselves, if I was wrong, would I want to know it? For me, that answer is yes. And if your answer is yes too, the next time you hear something that evolutionists, in air quotes, supposedly believe that seems stupid, ask the question, is that actually what they believe? And if so, why? Is it that they're all morons, or they're all deluded, or they're all afraid, or whatever? Or is it possible that maybe I'm just missing something? Maybe there's more to it than I've got right now. And then go find out. That's the next essential step. See what the actual scientists have to say. Hear what their model is. Take a course online. MIT offers them for free. You have absolutely nothing to fear from asking questions. One of the best parts about being skeptical is that if you ever find out you're wrong, just change your mind. Bam, you're not wrong anymore, like magic. So if you'd like to hear more about skepticism, how to ask questions, how to look at the good peer-reviewed evidence, head on over to Reason 2, the number 2, Doubt, our podcast. You can find us on Facebook, on iTunes. We cover everything, like I said, from aliens to anti-vaxxers. We have a ton of fun. So So this was a blast. Thanks for inviting me. And that's it.
Okay, Dr. Hovind, your closing statement, sir.
Well, thank you. I hope you do really have reasons to doubt, because you need to start doubting this theory you've been taught, that a mosquito and a whale both came from an amoeba 3.5 billion years ago from a pond of water which formed on a molten rock 4.6 billion years ago, which came from a dot of nothing. I think it's time you start doubting that. And so, whoa, what have I been sucked into here? I think the flat earthers ought to stop and slap themselves and say, what have I been sucked into here? You got sucked into one of the dumbest ideas in the history of the world, that we all came from a rock. Anyway, I agree. You mentioned several times that about peer-reviewed articles or nothing to fear from asking questions or ask actual scientists. I think if you went to North Korea and did a survey, you would find everybody there believes in communism. Because if you don't, you get executed. I think you'll find in America, the academic circles, if you don't accept and at least toe the party line with this evolution stuff, you will get excommunicated from the temples of higher learning. So I think it's not execution yet, but it is certainly academic Siberia if you dare to even question the evolution theory. I think your reasons to doubt ought to investigate. Why is there such a prejudice against the idea that there's a God? What would be wrong with there being a God creating these things? I have no idea who made this pen, but I'd be willing to bet $100 somebody made it. These things don't happen by chance. And if you look at your human body, look at a single cell. You're an engineer, for heaven's sake. Do you think a cell could create itself by chance over billions of years? Do you really, really believe that? Son, wake up. Okay? Thank you.
Okay, we're going to move then to a question and answer session. Standing for Truth has questions already saved that I guess he received from people, and he's going to read off the questions to you. So I'm just going to step back and hand it over to Standing for Truth. He's going to ask the questions, and you fellows can give your response to them. Standing for Truth, you ready, brother?
Yes, brother. Thanks so much to the debaters for a great debate. Very lively. We had a really big audience tonight with a ton of questions. We are just at the hour mark, so I don't want to keep the debaters too late. So I'm just going to pick 2 questions for each debater from the
Kelly, I'm way over time, but
from the audience. So we'll end it quick. We'll end it really quick. I'm just going to pick a couple questions here at random. This one is for Dr. Hoven from James Downard. He asks, has Kent studied the technical criticism of accelerated decay? I think he's referring to a possible heat problem in the global flood model. Go ahead, Dr. Hoven.
I guess I'd like to see what problem he's talking about. I'm not aware of anything that can't be answered so far. I've not seen any technical problems with the flood model. The Bible says certainly there was a flood, and the Bible, if you look at the Bible model, there was water under the crust of the earth, according to Genesis chapter 1. The earth was founded on the water and in the water. So the water in the crust would be superheated. It would crack out through the fault lines and come to the surface, and the superheated water would kill everything within 100-mile or some effective radius of the cracks. And that was where the fault lines are. There's a great website by Walt Brown, creationscience.com, that deals a lot with that, the subterranean water. And this superheating of the water jetting out under intense pressure from 10 miles of rock on top, I think can explain lots of things that we see with the chemistry of the ocean and the chemistry of some of the fossils that are found. But that's be a long discussion on that. So I guess I'm not aware of any problems with the flood model that can't be answered. So I'd like to see a more specific.
Awesome. Okay, thanks for that answer there, Dr. Hoven. This one is for Jordan. It's from Rock Art in the chat. He asks, let me see here. John Baumgartner predicted cold slabs under the earth if they had been subducted just 4,000 years ago. These predictions have come true. Why do evolutionists ignore this? Go ahead, Jordan.
Again, I'm not a geologist. That's not my area of expertise. So I'm not familiar with all the literature. My understanding as a layman, but knowing heat transfer, would be you'd expect some amount of cold slabs in the magma because heat transfer takes time. And as it's continually moving, as parts of it is melting, you'd get more fed in. That's my understanding as a layman, but I'm just a drooling idiot when it comes to that field. Go talk to a geologist.
Okay, if we're done with that question, I just got one more for each of the debaters. So this one is for Kent. Has any creationist ever presented arguments for how strata became rock lithification? I just read that.
I can make strata in my yard in a few minutes. You get a layer of mud, you lay it out in the sun, it turns to rock. I mean, almost all the sedimentary rock was at one time in the semi-liquid or liquid form. Limestone, obviously, slate, shale, all the different, not igneous rock, but all the sedimentary rock, of which 75% of the earth, I think, is covered by sedimentary rock. It was mud at one time. We got layer after layer right here on our property. This was a gravel pit for 50 years. They dug gravel, sand, and clay out of here. We have layers of clay like 4 or 5 inches thick that just go for hundreds of feet. Just modeling clay like you'd buy at Walmart. So yeah, the stratification, we can make strata in minutes. Take some mud, get some clay, mix it with water, make a paste out of it, lay it out in the sun. You can make strata in, well, a couple hours, maybe not minutes, but depending how hot it is that day. It gets hot down here in Alabama. I could probably make it in about an hour. Come on down, I'll make some for you.
Okay, thanks for that answer. Right before this last question, I do want to thank you, gentlemen, for staying slightly over time. It's been a really good debate. Like I said, a big audience today. Everybody enjoyed. So this last question is for Jordan. It's from Philip in the chat. He asks, where did the energy come from to form a singularity and for it to expand? If you don't accept creation, you still can't rule out the possibility of the supernatural. Go ahead, Jordan.
So I actually did a debate on my buddy Titus's podcast, Proselytize or Apostatize, on the Kalam cosmological argument, and so I kind of covered that there. Really briefly, there are cosmological models. The short answer is we don't know. Nobody knows the precise mechanism that the Big Bang used. It's a kind of a placeholder. Probably won't have that figured out until we have quantum gravity figured out, and I am not a physicist. But from my understanding, there are cosmological models that are infinite. So, for example, if the gravitational constant is such that the universe is almost flat, You can have the negative energy that comes from gravity, which appears to precisely cancel out the positive energy you get from matter and light, and so you might have a zero energy universe, in which case you wouldn't need any energy, the ultimate free lunch. Is that true? Is that actually what happened? We don't know. And if anybody has more questions, hit me up on Facebook, reasonodoubt.com. I'll answer all of them. Not.com, facebook.com, but Reason to Doubt. So that's it. That's all I had.
Awesome. Well, thanks for that answer there, Jordan. Yeah, thanks again, gentlemen, for a really good debate. Time has flown by. I'm going to throw it over to, actually, before I give it to Praise to shut it down, did the debaters have any closing statements? Did you guys want to plug in your channels or anything like that before we...
Thanks for coming out, Ken. I know you had a lot. Your schedule's super busy, so thanks for doing this. It was awesome.
Yeah, well, thank you. And come down and visit Dinosaur Adventureland in Lenox, Alabama. It's a free Christian campground. We have all kinds of stuff. We have a science center. You can see all kinds of stuff about science and the Bible. And we believe the Bible's true. And you're going to be judged one day, son. I want to get ready for that day. I predict you'll be dead for a really long time.
I agree.
Long time. Okay. All right.
All right. Thank you very much, gentlemen. It was a good debate. You handled yourselves very cordially. It was a very pleasant debate to watch, and I applaud both of you. Thank you so much for it.
All right. Thanks, guys. It was awesome.
Awesome.
Thank you.
Thanks
Okay.
so much, guys. God bless.
Hey guys, this is Standing for Truth, and you are in for a real treat. This debate is between Dr. Ken Hovind and Adam Heap. I set this up about 2 months ago, and you are not going to want to miss this one. It's engaging. It is one of the best debates on the global flood and Noah's Ark that you'll ever see. Guys, enjoy.
Shalom and greetings. So today we got Dr. Ken Hovind and Adam Heap in a debate on the Genesis flood. So I'm going to let my buddy Standing for Truth take over from here.
Awesome. Well, thanks, Praise, for allowing us to use your channel for this really exciting debate. It's been in the making for about a month now, so I'm excited. Everybody's excited. I know the audience is excited. So thanks so much, Dr. Ken Hovind and Adam Heap, for giving us your time, to enjoy this debate on Noah's flood. So it's going to be about the Genesis flood. We're going to start off here with Adam Heap. We're going to have a short intro from Adam, and then an opening presentation from Dr. Hovind. We're going to do a free-flowing discussion for about 30 minutes after that. No interruptions, even times, and then go into a couple short closings, and then just enough time for a few questions from the audience. We'll be going for about an hour till 4. So I'll hand it over to you, gentlemen. If you wanted to start there, Adam, you're good to go. You're muted right now, brother. So.
Right. Hello. Does this work? Can you see me?
Yes.
Sweet. Hello. My name's
Hello.
Adam, and I'm here to learn today. So Kent Hovind is a firm believer in the story of Noah's Ark. I currently am not. So the purpose of this debate, it's not so much of a debate as a learning experience, is a chance for me to play a game of questions with Dr. Kent Hovind. And I have a large list here. So it's going to be a very short introduction. I'm not really bringing anything to the table. I'm letting him do his thing. And then I shall be probing where and how I can, just to check the validity of his claims and all that sort of stuff. So I hope we have a good day today. Thank you, Kent, for joining us. Thank you for the hosts for doing the hosty thing. Thank you, and I hope we have a good session today.
That was it. Okay. Well, thank you so much for doing this. Adam, you have an accent here. Can you tell me where you're from?
I am from Great Britain.
Great. They still call it that. Is it still great? Is it?
Oh, it's smashing. It should be called cracking Britain.
We have a Scotsman here who's shaking his head saying, no, it's not so great anymore, but okay.
Well, they're Scottish. They do nothing but complain, so.
Okay, I see. Well, if I understand it right, what we're supposed to be discussing here, debating or something, is the question, is the flood story true? Is Noah's Ark story true? Is the Bible correct? And thank you for doing this. And Adam, I was told your MS is in zoology and herpetology, the study of reptiles and animals. True is something that's in accordance with fact or reality. Would it be a fact, would it be reality that the world was completely flooded and one family built a boat and saved all the critters on the boat? That's what the story says in Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8. So is it true? In accordance with actual state of affairs is the Webster Dictionary definition of the word true. Definition of true, something that is real, factually correct, accurate, or provable, as opposed to a lie. Apostle Pilate said in John chapter 18, what is truth? And by the way, most politicians still have no clue what truth is. Nothing's changed in 2,000 years. The Bible tells us to think about things that are true. And so I don't want to believe anything that's not true. And so if the flood story isn't true, I would sure like to know it. I'm very willing to be taught on this. Let me give you a quick history of where I think this all fits together. In the book of 2 Peter, chapter 3, Peter warned us that in the last days there would be scoffers who would come, who would be willingly ignorant that of how by the word of God the heavens were of old, and the earth standing out of the water and in the water. The Bible's pretty clear. When God made the earth, it was standing out of the water and in the water. What does that mean? Well, then it says, whereby the world that then was, being overflowed with water, perished. This world was destroyed by a flood. That's what the book says. Now, is it true? Well, the Bible says God sits on the circle of the earth and he stretched out the heavens. There are 17 references in the Bible to the stretching of the heavens, which explains the red shift and all that, but I want to get up to the part about the flood. I think to understand about Noah's flood and about the ark story, to find out, is this true, we first need to have an understanding of what the earth used to be like according to the Bible. Just like when you study any historical event, like World War II, why did the Germans attack England? Well, you need to know the background behind it. What happened? What was going on here? And so to know the background behind the ark story, you need to understand what was the earth like. It says in the Bible, the earth was formed out of the water and in the water. I believe there used to be a seventh layer of our atmosphere. There are now 6 layers to the atmosphere: troposphere, stratosphere, exosphere, etc. The 7th layer was a layer of water or ice, probably above the atmosphere, probably 6 miles up, or in your metric system, that would be 10 kilometers straight up. There are some heat sinks up there. As you go up in the atmosphere, you get up a certain altitude, like 10 kilometers or 6 miles, and it's 100 below zero right now over our head here in Lenox, Alabama, where it's 95 degrees out there. So the earth had a canopy of water overhead. It also had water under the crust of the earth. And I cover this on video number 2 of my seminar series. Let me get up here. But Jews have always taught there was water above the atmosphere. Here we go. Right here. There was also water under the crust of the earth. Most of the flood water for Noah's flood did not come from rain. Most of it came from inside the crust of the earth. Got a globe here somewhere. I did have. Where'd it go? Oh, here we go. All right. The earth today has a crust about 10 miles thick. It varies, sometimes only 3 miles thick under the ocean beds, but this crust of the earth used to have water in the crust of the earth, according to the scriptures anyway. The Bible says in Psalm 24, the earth is the Lord's. He founded it upon the seas. That means the foundation was upon the seas. And he established it upon the floods. So according to the Bible, the flood water was inside the earth, most of it. Same thing in Psalm 33. He gathereth the waters of the sea together as an heap. He layeth up the depth in storehouses. The depth is always a reference to the sea or the ocean in the Bible. So it used to be stored up inside the earth. Of course, everybody that studies earth science knows there's still a lot of water in the earth. Huge amounts of water still in the crust of the earth, subterranean water pockets. Okay, Psalm 136. He stretched out the earth above the waters. So the original creation had a layer of ice above, I'm just guessing 10 miles up, probably 2 or 3 inches thick. That made the earth like a big greenhouse, protected them, made them have perfect weather, perfect temperature, pole to pole, made the animals grow huge. Gigantic animals are found as fossils that simply are not alive today. They find fossil grasshoppers 2 feet long, fossil centipedes 18 inches long, fossils dragonflies with 5-foot wingspan. They simply could not fly today. Something had to be different. So a canopy overhead, like I think the Bible teaches, would be a reasonable explanation. They had greater air pressure and richer oxygen concentration to allow the insects to get much larger, and probably all the animals to get much larger in that world before the flood came and all this got messed up. There was a layer of air to breathe, probably 10 or 15 miles, and then a layer of rocks to stand on, the crust of the earth. Again, pick a number, 5 to 10 miles. And underneath that was water stored up for this flood. Walt Brown's book, In the Beginning, is fabulous on this, the hydroplate theory, how that there was water in the crust of the earth, and there still is a lot of it. The Bible says, in the 600th year of Noah's life, the same day were the fountains of the great deep broken up. Most of the flood water actually came from inside. It only rained for 40 days, but the water kept coming up for 150 days. So it's not all coming from rain. It's not possible to rain enough to cover all the mountains. I understand that. I don't think the mountains were there. I think the Bible teaches pretty clearly in Psalm 104, at the end of the flood, the mountains arose, the valleys sank down, and the water rushed off to fill in the holes. So it's interesting that all the mountain ranges today follow the coastlines. The Appalachian Mountains here in America follow the North Atlantic. The Rocky Mountains follow the Pacific. I think the mountain ranges formed during the last few months of the flood, when the mountains arose and the valleys sank down and the water rushed off. The plates of the earth is broken up into plates. I don't think anybody argues about that. Those plates would be shifting and moving with the weight of all this water on top, while the joints where they meet, the fault lines, was still weak, freshly broken, and they could still move. So the fountains of the deep broke open, and then the windows of heaven were opened, and it rained for 40 days. But the water underneath is really where the flood came from. It came shooting out to the surface along the cracks. The earth cracked up like an eggshell, and we have fault lines, San Andreas Fault, the Hayward Fault, the New Madrid Fault. None of them are my fault, but the earth definitely has cracks all over the place, and some are still moving, and we still have volcanoes and earthquakes along those cracks generally. But the water rushing out during the flood, rushing out of these cracks, would be under incredible pressure, 10 miles of rock. It would go shooting up like a rocket. Actually, a cubic foot of rock is about 160 pounds. That's what, 65, 70 kilograms. This would put 30 tons per square inch of pressure, 30 tons per square inch on the water underneath. It would go squirting out like what's the name of that water pressure thing they cut steel with?
Water jet.
Water jet. They make a water jet that'll cut through solid steel. 30 tons per square inch would shoot rocks up into orbit. I think we are still hitting debris from the stuff that was launched off the earth 4,600 years ago during Noah's flood, 4,400 years ago. The other night we're out watching the shooting stars, and zip, zip, they go across the sky. We're still hitting the debris that that launched off of here. It's scattered in space, and we're traveling around the sun, and once in a while we smack into it like bugs on a windshield. So some of the rocks would launch up from the flood and come back and land on the earth right away. Those would be erased by the flood. You would never see evidence of those. Those that landed near the end of the flood would probably leave a crater, but then most of it filled in, depending on how long it was exposed to water. Like the one in Quebec, Canada, 46 miles across, I think it is, the biggest crater on Earth known. That probably formed during the last part of the flood with a few weeks to go, and most of it filled in. And now it's just a circular lake. But the moon was probably shattered during this time, splattered with stuff coming off the Earth. The craters on the near side of the moon, the crater pattern is very different than the craters on the far side. This would be the stuff that shot past, got drawn back in by moon's gravity, and hit it on the backside. Earth has a lot of impact craters on it. You got some in England, I think, down near the southeastern tip of England. What's that, Cornwallis? No, it's the other side. Anyway, you have craters over there. Here's a Barringer crater in Arizona. I think this would have to be hit after the flood because it didn't fill in with sediments. It's still a big hole in the ground. The flood water escaping from underneath would cause the continents to slide back. Just like today, if you put 2 blocks of rock on top of a spring, move the rocks apart, all of a sudden the spring will bounce up in the middle, and the crust of the earth would do that. The subterranean world, the basalt layers, would spring up into the crack. As the crack gets wider, probably from simple erosion, from the water gushing out, as it gets to a certain depth or width, all of a sudden the bottom springs up. This happens in large mines all the time. They keep digging out the rock As they get further and further back, all of a sudden the bottom of the mine buckles up just from the weight on the outside. It might be a quarter mile away, but it makes the center of the mine buckle up. You can study all that. So I think Walt Brown is exactly right. The crust of the earth broke, the water came out, the basalt underneath lifted up, causing the crust of the earth to slide away. As long as there's still lubricating water under there, it would eventually grind to a halt when it hits bottom. That explains why we have wrinkled mountains. It's no different than pushing a carpeting up into the wall. All of a sudden it begins to wrinkle up. So lateral movement of the crust of the earth would cause these wrinkled mountain patterns that we find around the world. The earth still has the fault lines on it today. I think all the evidence that we see from earth science and from geology points to the fact this earth was destroyed by a flood. They find fossils on top of Mount Everest, tallest mountain in the world. Petrified clams in the closed position. I think I got one here. Yep. When you get petrified clams in the closed position, you know it had to be buried alive. There's a place in North Alabama where they're 10 feet thick, millions of petrified clams, beds of clams, closed. You can go down to the beach 70 miles south there in Pensacola and find 1 million seashells, but you aren't going to find a matched pair, and you certainly won't find them closed. Had to be buried alive. I don't know of another choice. If you got a better theory, I'd like to see it. So the Bible says Noah built an ark, saved 2 of each kind on board. I'm not sure exactly what a kind is in every case, but 2 of each kind, probably about 4,000 kinds of animals, plus the birds, maybe another 1,000 kinds of birds, just guessing, had to be on that ark. Then after that, they have diversified now through natural selection and variation within the kind. They've diversified into millions of species, but that's different than kinds. So today, the earth has ocean basins. 70% of the earth is still underwater. So if someone asks, where did the water from the flood go? It's still here. It's in the oceans. Just the Pacific is big enough to hold every continent in the world. All the continents would fit in just the Pacific. The earth today is 71% underwater. Only 29% is above water. And the part that's above water is only an average height of 2,300 feet or 2,600 feet, whereas the depth of the oceans averages 12,000 feet. So today, if you smoothed out the world, push all the mountains down, smooth it out, the water would be 8,000 miles deep, 8,000 feet deep, everywhere. 1.5 miles of water, completely covering the earth. That water's still here. The oceans today are gaining salt as mineral salts wash off the ground from water and erosion in rivers. And the evaporation takes out the water only, leaves the salt behind. It's a giant distillation process. So the oceans are gaining salt every day, yet they're only 3.6% salt. At the rate they're gaining salt, you would say, hey, this could have happened in a few thousand years. I think during Noah's flood, all the world was fresh water. Noah didn't have to bring water on board. He probably brought babies of all the animals, about 6,000 or 8,000 different kinds of animals, onto the ark. He didn't have to bring insects because they don't have nostrils. The God told him to bring those in whose nostrils is the breath of life. And insects can survive a flood just fine. So the flood was probably all fresh water, had all the water they needed, and now it's gradually become saltier since the flood, and some animals have adapted to salt water. We now have freshwater alligators and saltwater alligators, or crocodiles, I'm saying. They might have had a common ancestor called a crocodile. That's not proof crocodiles are related to mosquitoes. So to change, there are saltwater bass and freshwater bass. 1 minute left, okay. So today there is still an enormous amount of water in the crust of the earth. There are hot water subterranean vents. If there's hot water shooting up into the bottom of the ocean, where does it have to be coming from? Lower than the bottom of the ocean. Like, duh, okay? Tens of millions of these hot water vents are shooting up down there. And there's plenty of evidence of there still being a lot of water in the crust of the earth. Deep sea hydrothermal vents, they're called, and you can Google that and get 1 million pictures. So my position is, it is very reasonable, it is logical, it is true to believe there was a flood that destroyed this world. We have evidence of the damage it did all over the place. It is certainly reasonable that all the animals could come from 7,000 or 8,000 pairs of animals on a boat. It is not reasonable that all the animals could come from a rock 4.6 billion years ago, like the evolution theory teaches. It is reasonable that all the peoples of the world could come from a family of 8 on a boat. I think it's very reasonable. Okay, there you go.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for that opening presentation, Dr. Ken Hovind. Thank you for your introduction, Adam. Our next phase will be approximately about 25 or 30 minutes, just free-flowing dialogue. Hopefully I don't have to step in. Your last debate, guys, was actually very respectful, very fun to listen to, very engaging. So I'll leave it up to you guys and start the timer on whoever's first word, whoever wants to start.
Adam, go ahead.
Cheers, Kent. Interesting opening from yourself. If I could compare, if I was to say I had a carrot in the kitchen, and then one day I came home and the carrot was missing. There's the fact. The carrot has gone missing. I could throw out a what-if scenario. I could say the ghost of King Henry VIII came riding in on his horse and took the carrot. Well, it explains it because the carrot is no longer here. And ghost must exist. King Henry VIII existed. So it must be true. That's essentially what I'm hearing here. You're saying stuff and just applying your story to it, but giving no actual evidence to support the claims. One of the things that that was just a response to that. One of the things I want to do, I've got a list of questions here that stray a bit away from the geology. I don't know much about the geology. So if I could go over some of these questions that I've written, I'd love to do that, unless you wanted to continue with the stuff that you started with.
Well, as far as your Henry VIII stealing the carrot story, I think you could probably list every person on the earth instead of Henry VIII. It could be anybody. But I think that'd be a poor analogy. I did give lots of evidence. Okay, it is a fact. Fossilized clams are found all over the world, including the top of Mount Everest, and they're in the closed position. This is a fact. I don't think anybody argues with that. The flood story is a reasonable explanation for that. There are features like Grand Canyon here in America, where the top of the canyon is 4,000 feet higher than where the river starts cutting. The river starts cutting the canyon at Page, Arizona, and you can Google it. It's got an elevation of 2,800 feet above sea level. Well, the top of the canyon is 8,000 feet above sea level. Rivers don't flow uphill. Grand Canyon is a washed out spillway from a giant lake that drained. Go ahead.
What I mean by evidence is a collection of facts that point only to one specific explanation. That's what I meant by the King Henry VIII thing. It explains it, but there's no actual evidence to support that explanation. It's the same with yours. I mean, with the clams, there's all sorts of explanations for why that happened. Why is it your flood specifically?
Well, okay, I would like to hear your other explanations for the clam, but before we get there, keep in mind, we are not demanding that our explanation be taught in the schools at taxpayer expense. The evolutionists are demanding that we all pay to teach their explanation at taxpayer expense. I don't think there's any evidence at all that any animal has ever produced any other kind of animal. There is no scientific evidence that a dog ever made a non-dog or came from a non-dog. But yet all of us are being forced to pay for that religion to be taught in the schools. If we were all forced to pay, Henry VIII came and stole your carrot, I think everybody would object.
Should we pay to teach gravity in schools?
Your religion.
Should we teach gravity in schools?
Say, I didn't understand that. What now?
Should we teach the theory of gravity in schools? Can you hear me okay?
Well, yeah, there's plenty of evidence for gravity. I can show it. I can demonstrate it. We can measure it. 9.8 meters per second, 32 feet per second. I think we can demonstrate it. Can you demonstrate? Can you give me an explanation? Can you show me any animal producing a different kind of animal? Is this something
that's the topic for another debate, unfortunately, because we are.
Well, my point is, the flood story is a reasonable explanation, but we're not demanding that it be taught at taxpayer expense. So the burden of proof is not on me. You guys want to demand that we all teach your religion of evolution, and I think that's unfair and probably illegal.
But we're not talking about evolution in this debate. We're talking about Noah's flood. Can I ask my questions?
Noah's flood. How did the clams get on top of Mount Everest, Adam? What is your explanation? Petrified in the closed position?
I'm here to listen to your explanation and decide whether
I gave you mine.
Or not.
I gave you mine. The world was flooded, completely flooded. During the end of the flood, the mountains lifted up and the valley sank down, and so the mountains formed in the last part of the flood. Psalm 104 tells us that. That's a reasonable explanation. We have the clams on top of the mountain, and they're closed. And this doesn't happen any place in the world today. In nature, clams die all the time by the millions, but they don't ever petrify in the closed position. It's hard to get animals to find animals petrifying at all, anywhere. But petrified fossils are found in the ground by the billions and maybe even trillions. Fossils are found. They're not formed. How many animals died today in the world or yesterday and none of them fossilized. The buzzards dragged them all over, the coyotes, the ants, and fossils simply don't form. We never see fossils forming, and yet we find them in the ground by the billions. What's your explanation for fossils at all?
My explanation for fossils is that it's a process of I don't usually do fossilization, so that's not my field. But there have been billions of years for this stuff to happen, and it probably still is happening today.
You're sure there have been billions of years for it to happen?
Pretty certain.
Okay. Well, we don't see it happening today at all, so I don't think billions of years is going to help. Okay. If I told you if you kiss a frog, it'll turn to a prince, I think we would all agree that's a fairy tale. But it sounds to me like you believe if we wait billions of years, the frog will turn into the prince on its own. I think it's still a fairy tale. It's not true. There's no evidence for that. There's no evidence of any animal.
Can we keep this on Noah's flood, please?
Okay, sure. Noah's flood, the story says, God told Noah, 2 of each kind are going to come to you, save them on the boat. Afterwards, they got off the ark and spread out, probably from the country of today, Turkey. They could have easily gone everywhere in the world while the the crust of the earth was more exposed, just by lowering the oceans a few hundred feet. It connects everything. I mean, the water between Vietnam and Australia, this water is only 30 feet deep. You know, the width of this room. That's the depth of the water generally in here. So lowering the water 100 feet would connect everything. So animals could easily get off the ark in Turkey and over 100 years walk anywhere. So I think Noah's flood is a really reasonable explanation for why we have billions of fossils, for why we have layers and strata to the earth. During the flood, the moon would be pulling the water up, the high tide, and in order to keep that bump full as the earth turns, the water has to rush sideways to keep the bump full at the same speed the earth is turning. Well, here in Lenox, Alabama, 31 degrees north latitude, we're turning nearly 900 miles an hour. Water going sideways at 900 miles an hour would explain why we have gravel that is rounded off. It was in a big rock tumbler. It would explain why we have layers, stratification. Noah's flood is a very reasonable explanation for why we have stratification, for why we have petrified trees in the standing position connecting all these layers. Okay. I'll show you pictures if you like.
Is it right if we move on to my questions? I've been begging.
Actually
gagging to go over these questions.
I thought you wanted Noah's flood. Go ahead. What's your question?
Yeah. So I've got a series of questions. The first one being very simple. How big was the ark?
According to the Bible, it was about 515 feet, 300 cubits. And a cubit is elbow to fingertip. Mine's 20.2 inches. The standard Egyptian cubit is 20.65 inches. Everybody's cubit would be a little different. But according to the Bible, it'd make it about 515 feet long and about 85 feet wide and about 57 or 52 feet high, I believe, in 3 stories, 3 floors to it.
Would you agree that would probably be the largest wooden ship ever built?
At the time, yes, it would be the largest that we know of. Of course, according to the Bible, the people before the flood were living to be 900 years old. You could learn a lot in 900 years. Plus, God told him how to build it. There have been many ships built much bigger than that now. The Queen Mary is nearly twice it. What's that?
Are they all? Is it the largest wooden ship ever built?
There was a wooden ship built about that big. They had trouble sailing it because it had 6 sails, 6 masts, and the wind hit them at different speeds and twisted it, and it kept leaking. Of course, Noah's Ark didn't have any sails or masts. It wasn't designed to go anywhere. There was no place to go. It was only designed to float. So it would be more like probably a barge of some kind, float and land. It's only two. All it had to do is float, protect its cargo, and land. It didn't have to go anywhere. No sailing, subject to stresses of sailing would not be affect Noah's Ark.
Okay. How many animals were on the ark? And considering I picked up some quotes here from the Bible, Genesis 7:2, of every clean beast thou shalt take to thee by 7s. The male and his female, and of beasts that are not clean by 2, the male and his female. Considering later on as well, Noah decided to scrap that idea and just bought 2 of each. Which is the right one? Is it 7s of some and 2 of others, or is it just 2 all across the board?
Well, you just read it. It says that couldn't be more clear. There were 7 of the clean animals and 2 of each of the unclean. There are 2 theories about the clean. One is he took 7 pairs. The other is he took simply 7 animals, 7 clean. And then after the flood, Noah sacrificed some of them, which of course would wipe out the species if there's only 2. So the Bible there's no fuzziness about what it says. It says 7 of the clean and 2 of the unclean. Now,
but then it goes on,
always.
It goes on to say 7, 8 of clean beasts and of beasts that are not clean and of fowls, etc., etc. They went in 2 by 2 onto Noah into the ark.
Correct. That's what it says, and that's, I believe, what happened.
You just said it was 7s of the clean. You just said it was 7s of the clean.
Okay. I said there's 2 theories. Some people say it's 7 pair. Some people say just 7.
These are both in the Bible, and it's contradictory.
It's not contradictory. He brought 7 of the clean.
Of clean beasts, etc., etc. They went in 2 and 2. Chapter 7, verse 8. Of clean beasts, and of beasts that are not clean, and of fowls, and of everything that creepeth upon the earth, there went in 2 and 2 unto Noah into the ark.
Okay, if there are 7, are there at least 2? There were 2 of each kind. There were extras of the clean. I don't think anybody reading that without any prejudice would see a contradiction there. They would say, oh, this is no problem. He brought 2 of every kind of animal and 7 of the clean. That's what it says.
Okay. Let's move on then. All right. The Bible states that 2 of every sort will go onto the ark. What is a sort?
That's a great question. Carolus Linnaeus decided to classify animals, which is what your MS is in, zoology and herpetology. We have a classification system that we've used in the last 400 years based on kingdom, phylum, class, order, family, genus, species. I don't think God cares about our classification system. He divided the animals up into their sort or kind. That phrase is used 20 times in the first 7 chapters. They would bring forth after their kind or bring forth after their sort. So I think in most cases, a 5-year-old could tell you if 2 animals are the same sort of animal. I think a 5-year-old would know that a dog and a wolf are the same sort or same kind of animal. And I think probably a 3-year-old would know a dog and a mosquito are not the same kind. So I think 99% of the cases, it's a no-brainer. Now, there are some difficult ones, even today in classification. If your degrees in herpetology or in zoology, you would understand. People today argue about which family or which genus a certain animal goes into. There is still a huge amount of argument about speciation. Which species is this, and giving it the proper name. And sometimes they have to bump them around and move them around to a whole new class or a whole new family or genus, maybe not an order. I don't know how far it goes. I would just guess that the Bible term kind or sort is probably somewhere along the line of family, according to our current classification system.
So there's no distinction between the 2?
Between kind and sort?
Yeah.
I don't know of any distinction because the words are used interchangeably in the flood story, especially in Genesis 6 and 7. Kind and sort appear to be the same meaning of the same word.
Okay. So have you got any definition for either of them?
Any definition for what now?
For either of them, sort or kind.
Well, that's what I just got done telling you. I think that, do you have a definition for the word species?
Yeah.
Well,
they produce fertile offspring.
Well, are dog and a wolf different species?
Dogs are wolves. That's a
coyote?
nonsense question.
No, it's not a nonsense. Why are they named? They have a different species name. Canis lupus, Canis domesticus, Canis coyotes. They're different species, but yet they can interbreed. Can you give me an airtight definition of species that never has an exception to it?
That never has an exception to it. Well, that's quite difficult because once you get into like certain bacterias, they don't reproduce in the same way. So you can't really do it across the board because things work with different organisms.
I agree.
But the majority, like your terrestrials and your vertebrates and your invertebrates, it tends to be pretty obvious with some exceptions.
That's exactly. Adam, you're making my point for me. That's exactly correct. It generally tends to be obvious. I think it's obvious to a 4-year-old what the same kind of animal is. I bet if you give me 1,000 pictures of animals, we got a 3-year-old on the campus here. Just turned 3. I'll say, Abby, would you please sort these? Which ones would you say are the same kind? I bet she would get 95% of them. And I bet her 5-year-old brother would get probably 98% of them. So even today, and you know this is true.
So you say that 3- and 4-year-olds can do it. Okay, so if it's that easy, let's have a definition.
It is those that they could originally bring forth after their kind.
How would you decide that? How would you research that?
Today, Alaska rabbits cannot breed with Florida rabbits. They have diversified. They're still rabbit. The Florida rabbits can breed with the Minnesota rabbits, and the Minnesota rabbits can breed with the Alaska rabbits. But the rabbit family has diversified to where some of the branches are no longer interfertile. They probably could be induced, in the laboratory or something, but there's enough differences in the cold weather rabbits and the warm weather rabbits that they generally won't bring forth. But so in the original creation, they could all bring forth the same kind. I think a dog and a wolf can bring forth offspring. I think a dog and a mosquito cannot. Neither can a dog and a whale or a dog and a pine tree. So I think in 99% of the cases, it's sort of obvious, like you said, what the same kind of animal is. Now, why would you pick at this straw, strain out this gnat, and swallow a camel? Do you believe mosquitoes and whales are related? You have an MS in zoology. Are mosquitoes and whales related, Adam?
I'm a bit... You haven't actually you've given me examples and they're vague at best, but you haven't actually given me a definition. You say a 3 or 4 year old can tell what a kind is, and yet you haven't given a definition for it.
I did. I said they could bring forth. Originally, they could bring forth.
That's what species is. There you say originally, but that you've told me that you've given me a vague example of, we think that rabbits are all the same kind, but that's not actually evidence. So you need to have an actual definition that we can work with today to bring results.
Okay. Hold it. I need to have an absolute definition. Adam, I'm not making
I didn't say absolute. I didn't say absolute. I didn't say
Okay, yeah, you did say absolute. Okay, but I'm not forcing everybody to pay for my theory to be taught. You think we should
No. Don't change it again. Don't do that. I want a definition of sort and kind that we can work with to decide.
I'll tell you again for the third time. Write it down this time. Those that originally could bring forth are the same kind.
Now, how do you test that? A definition has to be something that you can test as well. You can apply things to.
If I was demanding for my theory to be taught in the schools, then I would have.
Don't do that again. Don't do that again. Stick on the topic. Kind and sort definition.
I want you to, Adam, I want you to see the hypocrisy of what you are doing. You think everybody should teach evolution, don't you?
It depends where it's happening. If it's a PE class, I don't think it should be taught there.
Okay. Should all the kids in public school science classes be taught that evolution is true?
I think they should be taught its current scientific knowledge.
It's the current scientific theory, or it's current scientific fact?
Well, there are facts within evolution. A culmination of facts brings about a theory.
I see you're reluctant to answer
You're
the
trying
question.
to move away from the fact that I'm trying to get you to give me definitions that actually work.
I
can see that you're trying to get me away from it and try to turn it back on me. But we're not talking evolution. This is Noah's flood. We're not talking about evolution.
Okay. I'm showing the hypocrisy. I'm not asking everybody demanding everybody pay for mine to be taught, but I'll give you a definition. The Bible says they will bring forth, i.e., have babies, after their kind. Do you know of any exceptions where any animal has ever brought forth something that was not the same kind of animal?
How can I do that if you haven't given me a definition of kind? How can I give you an example of something that's changed kind but you haven't defined kind?
I'll give it to you again. If they can bring forth. Let's look at all the babies in the world today of anything, plants or animals. Are they the same kind as their parent? Do you know of any that would be considered a different kind? What's the best example you know of?
You haven't defined kind, so how can I answer?
Look at the baby, look at the mama. Is this going to come out to be looking and working and functioning the same way as the mama and dad? I think it's the same kind of animal.
Not the baby's born without legs.
What now? Are there babies born that are not the same kind as the parents?
You just said if it functions the same as the mother. Well, if a baby's born without legs, then it doesn't function the same way as the mother. You haven't defined kinds. You can't ask me to give you an example of kinds, given something that's non-kind, when you haven't given me the definition of kind itself. I've been asking you for the last 10 minutes to give me just one definition, and you've failed to do it.
I've given it to you 6 times. Pay attention, son, or you're going to. Pay attention, son. You're going to flunk my class if you don't pay attention. They could originally bring forth after their kind if they could bring forth. That's the definition. Can they bring forth? Can they produce babies? Can a pine tree and a whale make a baby? Can a pine tree and a mosquito make a baby?
Can a bearded dragon and an iguana? Can a bearded dragon and an iguana?
Iguana?
A bearded dragon and an iguana.
No, that's a good question.
How about a royal python and an anaconda?
I don't think an anaconda and a bearded dragon can make a baby.
What about raw python and a European adder?
No. There are about 60 or 80 different families within the snake category. Maybe it's more, maybe it's 100, but certainly there are not millions. I think all the snakes in the world could probably be put into 100 different kinds.
How do you know that?
I'm just picking a number for sake of the argument here. We could look it up exactly.
What gives you that number? What gives you that number? Why do you settle at 100?
Well, it's reasonable to work with. It's reasonable to work with. Do you think a snake and a elephant can bring forth a baby?
Why are you bringing an elephant into this? We're talking snakes.
I'm trying to get you to see how stupid the evolution theory is. It's retarded. And here we are all paying for this to be taught to everybody, and it's insanely stupid. It is not true. I'm defending the flood story as being reasonable. It is reasonable to believe God made animals to bring forth after their kind. Noah brought them onto the ark after their kind, and today they're still bringing forth after their kind. That is very reasonable. I think I win the debate. That was the purpose of the debate, to defend the Bible story. Show me an example where any animal brought forth something other than its kind.
So you said kind was it brings forth after its original kind. How do you find what the original is?
I've told you 7 times now. Son, I think you flunk. Okay, take the class again. If they can bring forth, they are the same kind. Here's Webster's dictionary. Kind, sort, variety, class. A natural group or division. Did you say, could the animals be naturally divided into division into birds and reptiles? They could be naturally divided. Could they be divided with fish? Can fish be divided away from birds? Can they be naturally divided?
Can I give you an example of a? Have you ever heard of Morganucodon? Which is
I can't understand you. Example of what now?
Morganucodon. It is a.
I didn't hear you.
It's a reptile. Morganucodon. It might be Morganusodon.
I'm sorry, I did not hear what he said. The computer gone?
The name doesn't really matter. It is a reptile that has fur. It's got the gait of a lizard, and it's got the jaw that's halfway between lizard or reptile and mammal jaw. Is that
you have a
mammal?
A reptile with fur? Wait a minute, Adam, slow down now. You're a zoologist here. What is the name of the reptile with fur, please?
Morganucodon.
How do you spell that?
Morgan. You know, like the name Morgan.
Okay.
U-C.
U-C?
Odon. So yeah, O-D-O-N.
Morganucodon is a reptile with fur, you're telling me. I've never heard of this. I will look it up. Now, if there are some strange ones like the duck-billed platypus that we don't know where to put them, would you put the duck-billed platypus in the same kind or in the same species as anything else? Is there anything similar to a duck-billed platypus? Or is it
put it in the same species as anything else? Well, no, because it's a species unto itself.
It's a species unto itself. Very good. So we can classify animals. How do we classify animals at all? If evolution is true, there should be a blended variety from the amoeba to the whale with everything in between. Why can we even classify them at all? Noah's flood story is very reasonable to answer that. They came onto the ark after their kind. They went off after their kind. They've been making babies after their kind ever since.
Okay. How do you classify red and green?
Good question.
Take the color spectrum and classify red and green and make it distinguished.
Right. Somebody has to all the scientists have to get together and agree this frequency will be called green. If it varies too far from that, we'll have to call it something else. But there's probably a blended infinite number of colors between our 7 colors we've chosen to set as the standard: red, orange, yellow, green, blue, violet. So indigo violet. So I think we have set standards for saying this is red, a certain frequency, but there's 10 million shades of red, and they gradually fade into the other colors. I understand.
Exactly. Gradual fade,
now,
right.
Adam,
we get back onto Noah's flood now, please.
Do we see the same blending between elephants and snakes? Where is the animal that's 96% elephant? Where is the animal 96% elephant?
If possible, I think we've strayed off topic. Could we go back to Noah's
flood? I'm just going to
You don't want to answer that question. You made up the color story about the red and green. I'm asking you, where is the animal that is 96% elephant?
If you can answer that question, Adam.
Well,
I can show you a color that's 96% green.
No, you can't.
I could show you there's a blending between green and red. I don't think you can show me a blending between snakes and elephants. I think you're making it all up. I think it's a stupid theory.
And then I'm just going to step in real quick here. So looks like you've, on your question, Adam, about kinds and related questions to that, looks like we spent a while on that. I've got some things written down from Dr. Hoven's opening presentation. We've got exactly 4 minutes for the discussion portion. Do you have any objections to anything that Dr. Hoven said in regards to the canopy, fossils, the evidence that he gave for a global flood? If we want to spend the last few minutes on those things instead of kind.
I'd like because I've only gone through like 3 of the 20 questions I've had. So if I just get some quick answers to some of the other questions. Okay. So I'm trying to get it back. So I've worked hard on these questions and I've hardly been able to get any.
Of course, yep. And take as much time as you need if you want to ask your question and not spend too much time, I guess, arguing on one question. Go ahead.
Yeah. Okay. Right. So Kent, how long was the vessel at sea for?
The battle at sea? What is that?
Oh no, the vessel at sea for.
Well, according to the Bible, Noah got in the ark and then a year and 2 weeks later got out of the ark. However, it says in the 7th month, it landed. It took 5 months for the earth to dry out or the water to run away or the crust of the earth to quit shaking around. So Noah was at sea for probably about 6 or 7 months.
Right, okay.
Okay.
Yeah. How did Noah account for lull and roll of the boat? Because I imagine there's probably a lot of turbulence. Water turbulence. You probably got at least a sea state 8 or 9 throughout this whole thing. How do we account for lull and roll of the boat, considering that keels weren't invented until the Vikings?
Well, if you study what they have discovered in Turkey that they're claiming is indeed Noah's Ark, let's see, it's on part 3 of my story. They have found 12 giant stones. They call them drogue stones, D-R-O-G-U-E. The drogue stones apparently were held under the boat hanging by ropes. Let's see, the ark, I don't know where that is. I have to find the slides. If you watch my seminar series, but they found 12 of these rocks. They weigh about 9,000 pounds apiece. They apparently were held over the side of the boat hanging on ropes. Drogue stones they're called. I'll show you pictures. If I had the question earlier, I'd get ready for it. But what would happen if you had rocks hanging around the boat, big rocks hanging on ropes, the wind would automatically turn you perpendicular to the waves. You don't have any roll because you're facing the waves head on. It's called a drogue stone. These have been found. They're in the museums over there in Turkey where they have the Turkish government built a visitor center where they claim Noah's Ark is, what the remnants of it. If you watch my video number, here it is right here. Video number 3, the drogue stones, slide number 148, 148, enter. This is one of the drogue stones here. The Vikings carved crosses on them when they came through there. Not the Vikings, the Crusaders. They said, man, this is from Noah's Ark. These rocks weigh about 9,000 pounds, 4,000 kilograms. The hole in the top is larger in the center than it is at the exits on both sides. Apparently, there was a rope through there with a knot in the middle, so it can't chafe the rope and go back and forth. Ships today in the Sea of Galilee, use drogue stones to hang them over the side of the boat. During stormy weather, drop the rocks down in. It stops the roll from happening because the rocks create drag, effectively a sea anchor. Here's an example of what it might look like. If it gets really windy, the boat would be automatically turned perpendicular to the waves. You hit them head on. So there is no roll at sea with a boat with drogue stones. Simple solution. I mean, people today can figure this out. Noah was 600 when he built the boat. I'm sure he figured it out, and he did it under the instructions of God. So the answer to your question is there were probably big rocks hanging all over the boat, drogue stones, they're called, and that would prevent, there was no roll.
Okay.
Ships today.
Can I move on to my next question?
Navy, ask the Navy of your country, do they try to always hit the waves nose on? Of course they do, because you don't want the roll. So Noah didn't have to have any steering mechanism at all. The wind is going to cause the waves. Waves are always perpendicular to the wind. And so by having the side of the boat itself catch the wind, it's going to turn it perpendicular. It's going to hit them head on. There will be no such thing as roll on the ark.
Okay. Moving on then. What was the next question? So I've mentioned water turbulence. Obviously, what would the water turbulence be like? What would be the sea state?
I didn't understand that. I speak American, not English, but what was it?
What would have been the sea state? Sea state goes 1 through 10. 1 is like the water is like a mirror. 10 is the waves are 50 feet high.
Well, that even to this day, right now, this moment, it varies from 1 to 10 all over the world. I mean, some places it's a 1, some places it's a 10 right now. So
considering the conditions of Noah's flood, what would the
there's no way to tell. I think Noah was in calm water the whole time and didn't have a problem.
Calm water, despite the fact that all this water has been displaced.
Oh, yeah. There's water when they had the earthquake in Indonesia in 2004, all the landslide underwater made a huge tidal wave that killed 250,000 people. We didn't feel a thing in Pensacola, Florida.
Wait, so you said earlier that the water was jetted so much that debris was flung into space. The entire world was flooded, and you think
right? And within an effective radius of that crack, you would get enormous problems. But see, Noah was outside of the danger zone from all those cracks.
Okay.
Prove I'm wrong.
Right. Ancient Mesopotamia would use what we now call keleks at the time of the supposed Noah's flood, which ships.
You've got 20 seconds, gentlemen. So I guess this will be your last question. Adam,
yeah. Okay. Is it all right to just finish off this question then, despite the time limit?
Of course. Yeah. Ask that question, and we'll allow Dr. Hovind to respond.
Right, okay, so the question overall is what kind of boats would be around during that era? So obviously you've got ancient Mesopotamia, they used keleks, which were ships supported by inflated animal skins. The Egyptians had only just started making boats that were able to enter the oceans, and they were made with bits of wood or papyrus, and they were tied together with rope, and all the holes were filled with reeds. How would you, in the times where this is the top of technology, the absolute top, how would you expect a boat to be at sea for over a year in, you say the seas were calm, but they wouldn't be, turbulent waters, with a wooden ship bigger than the biggest wooden ship ever built? How do you account for that?
Well, first of all, he was at sea for 7 months. I already answered that. Secondly, he was 600 years old. He'd be smart enough to think of this kind of stuff ahead of time. Thirdly, God told him how to build the boat. Fourthly, we can't prove it was in calm water or rough water. You're assuming the worst in every scenario because you don't want to believe the Bible, do you, son? You want to reject God's clear teaching of the Word, and I understand that. That's your option. But worse yet, you guys want all of us to pay for that stupidness to be taught in schools. I don't think that's fair. But I think Noah's Ark story is told very clearly and succinctly in the Bible in 3 chapters, Genesis chapter 6, 7, and 8. Jesus claimed to believe it. Millions of people around the world have claimed to believe there was a worldwide flood. 330 flood legends now have been found from cultures around the world that had no connection with each other. There's certainly a lot of history about a worldwide flood. So to answer the specific questions of exactly how tall were the waves when Noah was, sailing 6 months and 3 days after the storm started, I don't know. Doesn't matter. But there are storms going on right now, probably hurricanes right now hitting Thailand or something. They're not affecting us over here. It's a big world. And it's very reasonable for there to be really horrible waves and storms and perfectly calm outside an effective radius of that. That's simple inverse square law.
Have you ever been on a flat bottom vessel in Sea State 4?
Oh, I don't know if it was flat bottom or not. Why would you say that?
Because keels weren't invented until the Vikings.
Keels weren't invented. That's in our modern history. That's post-flood. Noah's Ark apparently did have a keel. They found it. Let me show you here.
There weren't any keels known until the Vikings, which were...
Well, that's because they're not studying Noah's Ark. They found the keel up near the mountain, Mount Ararat. This is a volcano. Mudslides and lava flows have pushed the Ark down, but it tore the keel off. It was actually full of ballast stones. Noah's Ark had an effective keel because it's still there. Go over and study it in Turkey. You can go see it for yourself. There are ballast stones in it right now. And it's ripped off the bottom of the boat. The boat has slid down 17 miles from 4,000 miles of earthquakes and mud flows. So just because the Vikings finally refigured it out doesn't mean there wasn't one before that. People were 900 before the flood. I think you're stuck with the dreaming assumption that people today are smart and ancient people are stupid. That's starting with the wrong premise. Ancient people were smart. We can't build the pyramids today. We can't lift a 2,000-ton stone up in the wall of Machu Picchu. We have no way of lifting it. They knew something we don't know.
And I'm just going to stop it there, gentlemen. I think that's the perfect way to end the discussion. We're going to go right into your quick closing, Adam, just a minute or two. And then Dr. Hovind, same thing. Thanks so much for the discussion. Very engaging, a lot of fun. Audience seemed to enjoy. And then we're going to go into a really quick question and answer before this hour is up. We've got 2 questions for each of the debaters, so it'll be nice and quick. We'll start with you, Adam. You've got a couple minutes. Say what you need to say, and then we'll go on to Dr. Hovind to give his final thoughts as well.
Thank you very much. There are a lot of questions that I didn't get to go over. At various points, he tried to bring it onto evolution when I made it clear at the start. That's not what we were talking about. We were talking about Noah's flood. And every time he got cornered, he said, well, I'm not the one pushing for this to be taught in schools, which is a bogus defense. It's not even a defense. It's just trying to avoid any sort of answer. I could have gone over things such as, what did Noah do about the insects? I mean, the Bible verses said that everything that was living was destroyed on the earth, apart from that which was on Noah's boat. I didn't get to answer that question. What did everything eat on the ark? What did they drink? Where would this be stored? Because obviously on a boat, you'd need it to be central. You need everything to be central. Where's all this weight distributed? Did anything get sick on the ark? When Noah made the sacrifice of an animal after they landed, did he wipe out an entire species? If animals microevolved after the flood, like he says they do, and we've got the great diversity of life after the flood, what would life look like in 100 million years from now? What happened to plants if they went on the ark? Because if there was a flood that destroyed everything on Earth, surely we wouldn't have plants anymore. Why don't all animals show a genetic bottleneck at the time of the flood? It's something we simply don't see. Why were there civilizations such as the Egyptians completely unaffected by the flood? Why does the Chinese calendar start in 4717 and wasn't interrupted by the flood? What about dinosaurs? What about Tiktaalik and Morganucodon, which I mentioned earlier? Were they on the flood? How soon after the flood, if they were on the boat, were they killed off? Were there any animals left off of the ark? Why is the last common male human ancestor estimated to be about 340,000 years old as of latest estimates, whereas it should be in the region of 4,000 something years old if we were to believe this story? And my last question would have been, why does all modern science disagree with you? I didn't get to answer any of these questions because he kept diverting and trying to place the blame on me. But I've enjoyed this. Thank you very much. My name's Adam. I hope I've done you all a good service tonight. Thank you and goodbye.
All right.
Okay, well, Adam, go ahead, Dr. Hovind. Sorry.
Okay. Adam, thank you for doing this. I've been turned down for debates about 8,000 times. Most people don't want to defend their religion in front of somebody who may be able to answer them. And by the way, every question you asked here in your last closing here, I think I can answer. And let's do this again sometime. And let me get the questions ahead of time, and I'll put a slide presentation. I answer all of them in my seminar series, which you can get from drdino.com, D-R-D-I-N-O, or you can call 855-BIG-DINO, go to extension 1 and get my whole series of tapes for $50. It's 18 hours. After you watch it, you can return it and get your money back, minus the shipping. I don't know anybody who does that. I mean, we're trying to win the war. So all these questions get wrong. Adam, I guess I would have a question for you. If all these questions could be answered satisfactorily with a reasonable, logical, scientific answer, would you then say, wow, the Bible's true, I'm going to accept Jesus Christ as my Savior? Or would you go around looking for 50 more questions? If you're a hypocrite, you would keep looking for 50 more questions because you wouldn't want the truth to be known. But if you're really sincere, honest, intelligent individual, you'd say, okay, wow, there is an answer. I think I'll accept what the Bible says. I think the Bible clearly teaches there was a flood. There's no question about that. Jesus certainly believed in it. He quoted it many times. There are 350 flood legends around the world. Something had to happen for there to be a legend like that. 70% of the earth is still covered by sedimentary rock, which is flood-borne sedimentary rock. Rounded gravel worldwide. I'm in a gravel pit here. We have billions of rocks. They're rounded off. Rock tumbler, Noah's flood. The ark has been found. They've studied it. They've measured it. They've looked at it. It's made of 3 layers of laminated wood, about 4 or 5 inches thick. There are polystrata fossils found all over the world. Petrified trees standing up, connecting all these layers. We teach all those layers would form in one flood. Get a jar of water, add sand, gravel, rocks, mud, and shake it up. It'll settle into layers in seconds in your hand. Hydrologic sorting would happen because of Noah's flood. There's enough water on the earth right now to cover the earth 1.5 miles deep. It's not a question of is there enough water. During the flood, it was probably all fresh water. It's gotten saltier since then. Noah didn't have to bring water on the ark. They could drink out of the ocean. Time's up. Oh, rats. A Chinese calendar. I'll get to all of them next time, Adam. Hang in there. But remember, if I answer them all, I want you to get converted, okay?
Awesome. Thank you so much for that, Dr. Hovind. Thanks so much for a great debate, gentlemen. So we're just going to go into a really, really fast-paced Q&A here. I've got 2 questions for each of the debaters. So I guess I'll start with Dr. Hovind here. The question for you is, how does Kent explain the ordering of the fossil record? For example, no whales in Cambrian layers.
Well, I would say, first place, there is no such thing as a fossil record. There are fossils, billions of them, possibly trillions. Fossils indicate rapid burial. The bones are still articulated. They didn't get dragged around the woods by the coyotes and the buzzards, etc. So there is no fossil record. It is us putting our interpretation on them. If there's any sorting at all, and it's not a clear sorting like they would like you to believe, I think you would generally find birds on top, because birds are the last ones to drown, and when they drown, they have hollow feathers and bones, and so they're going to float to the top. I think we generally would find clams at the bottom, because clams are already at the bottom when the flood starts, and they have solid shell, and they're heavy, and they can't run very fast. They're going to be the first ones buried. So I think if there's any sorting at all, in some areas there is sort of a sorting. It's based upon body density. It's based upon mobility or intelligence. I think if you Google what is the body density of the average reptile, you'll find it is different than the body density of the average mammal. So they're automatically going to be sorted by density. Hello, it's simple physics 101. Of course, things are sorted by density. So I think if there's any sorting at all, and it's not like they would like you to believe, the fossil record and the geologic column, if there's any semblance to it, it could easily be explained by a Noah's flood. A worldwide flood would answer all of that without a question. Okay?
Thank you. I appreciate that answer, Dr. Hovind. So this question is for Adam. How does Adam explain the existence of living fossils, for example, the coelacanth and the Wollemi pine? Go ahead.
Well, when something is suitable to its environment, then there's no pressure for it to change. You see this in a lot of body forms, like fish, for example. Fish have been around for many, many years. And it's as simple as that. If there's no need to change, then there's no need to change. Sometimes things will diverse a bit and then come back into the previous environment and go back to what they were before. It's when they enter new environments or new situations that they'll start to see the change. So, of course, you're going to get some creatures that spend the vast majority of history in very, very similar environments, either because those environments are large and don't change very much, or because those environments can just shift and the animals can follow. Of course, there are different examples. For example, when you get an island splitting off, or animals landing on an island, say from the mainland, that creatures adapt much quicker because they're in different environments. That's my answer to the question.
Okay, thanks, Adam. I appreciate that. Next question, I'll just read this word for word for Dr. Hovind. The questioner in the audience asks, in the Bible, how can the first day and second day be literal days when the sun and moon were made on the fourth day and evening and morning were made on the first day?
Well, great question. If the sun disappeared right now, blew up, left the galaxy, left the universe, we could still have a 24-hour day, because it's how long Earth does Earth take to spin around one time? That is a day. A day is defined as one spin of the Earth. Whether there's a sun or not doesn't matter. Now, it just so happens that half of the day, 24-hour day, is lit up. We call that day also, daylight. Half of it is dark. But it could be one spin of the Earth in relation to anything. The Earth could be spinning in relation to the pole, some star someplace, or in relation to anything. I think God purposely made the sun later in the creation week. It's only a couple days later. It's not a big deal. He purposely made the sun later so we would know not to worship it. It's just a necessary object. Oxygen's necessary too. You got to have it, but we don't worship it. Water's necessary, but we don't worship that either. So the sun is neat. I'm glad we got it up there, but it's not something we should worship. And most cultures of the world have fallen into the trap of worshiping the sun of some kind, like the atheist Ra, the sun god, he calls himself. So I think God made it later just so we'd know not to be so stupid as to worship the sun.
Awesome. I appreciate that, Dr. Hovind. So we got the final question here for Adam. Adam, The question is, how does Adam explain the sediment layers and that we see quick or no erosion between layers and we see complete rock layer sequences deposited rapidly in abrupt succession? Go ahead, Adam. Oh, did you get that, Adam? Are you on mute?
Sorry, I was on mute. I was just in the middle of saying I am not a geologist. I have no idea. I don't know how rocks work. I do not know how rocks work. So if I said anything, it would be ignorant. Born of ignorance.
Okay, I can allow a quick last response
can I say,
from Dr. Hoven there if you'd like, and then we can...
Can I say something about his previous response then if he gets something?
Sure. If Dr. Hoven wants to respond to that one real quick, and then you can do a quick response to Dr. Hoven's question, and then we'll call it a day, gentlemen.
Yeah, I think sediment layers are very easy to explain by a worldwide flood in the days of Noah. You can make sediment layers, we make it in a jar in a matter of seconds. I can show it, it can watch it happen. So that's real science. Science is things we can observe, study, and test and demonstrate. I think we can demonstrate with a scientific experiment that animals would automatically sort themselves, dead animals, based on body density, habitat mobility, etc., and that sediment layers can be formed rapidly. There's a video called Experiments in Stratification where they show sediment layers 10 or 15 at a time being deposited horizontally. The atheists are saying the layers on top are younger than the ones on the bottom. I say, you got to be kidding. If this one's younger, did it come from outer space? How can any layer possibly be younger than any other layer unless it came from outer space? All the layers are the same age. They were just reshuffled at the time of Noah's flood, but they don't want to believe in the flood. Peter hit it right on the head. They're willingly ignorant of the creation and the flood because it represents the judgment of God. So I don't think there's no such thing as a fossil record. The sediment layers all formed during Noah's flood. They're all the same age. And petrified trees in the vertical position are proof of that. And I show that some other time. Go ahead.
I just want a quick word on your density decides where something lands in the layers. I looked up earlier today spiders, and you have Sicariidae, which is found in the Neogene strata, which is some of the top layers of rocks. You also get spiders Aterocopus, found in Devonian strata, which are much, much further down. This alone is a clear contradiction to your idea that everything is sorted by density, because they're both spiders.
Well, I can answer that very simply. During the flood, there would be areas that would be inundated for a while, and then if the crust of the earth flexes up and down, like it would normally, then that layer may be up and exposed and dry out, and then it goes down, and new layers are put on top. If all of the strata were formed at the same time, you would be correct. I said all of the strata were formed in the same flood. That flood could deposit things where you'd get the denser object stuck in the top because it was during the last part of the flood that it finally got settled there. I think it's very easy to explain how things could be out of order based upon a flood lasting a year and the crust of the earth flexing up and down. So right here in our gravel pit, we have 5 layers of gravel, clay, gravel, clay, gravel, clay. You guys saw them today. That would be formed by each tide. Each tide coming in would form a layer of gravel. And then during high tide, when it sits still, small stuff settles out and makes a layer of clay. You can Google stratification, and you'll see it all over the world. Let's see, 264. We have the little thing made out of sand right here. You flip it over, and it makes multiple layers in a matter of a minute. This doesn't take a long time. These little sand toys, you can buy them at, I don't know if you have Walmart in England, but they make multiple strata very rapidly. So there's no such thing as a geologic column. It's one of the dumbest ideas we've ever taught to kids. I taught earth science 15 years. There is no geologic column. The stratification would be because of Noah's flood, and there may end up being some layers on top, just like these 2 densities of sand, blue and white. They're going to sort into multiple layers. Here, the black and the white are different densities, but it doesn't just all be black at the bottom and white on top. It has to do with how the water moves around. Okay.
Awesome. Well, thanks so much for that response, Dr. Hoven. Awesome Q&A, guys. The debate was very enjoyable. I want to thank you both for giving us your time. I know you guys are very busy. So as usual, it was a blast, guys. If you want to say some final words, if you want to promote your channels or whatever, and then we'll call it a day.
Yeah, go ahead, Adam.
Yeah, where do I find this recording? It's not on YouTube, is it?
Oh, yes. Adam, it will be. This debate will be uploaded on my channel, Standing for Truth, probably in the next 30 minutes or so. So I can send you the link.
Well, Adam, are you talking about this debate we just did? It'll be on his channel and our channel, Kent Hovind Official. But the experiments in stratification is called Experiments in Stratification. It was done at the Navy flumes in Colorado, where they test stratification so they can know where to hide their submarines and stuff. Experiments in stratification.
Okay? I just want to say thank you, Kent. Thank you, Standing, and thank you, Praise. It's been enjoyable, and I hope you'll have a tremendous evening.
Well, thank you for coming doing this, Adam, and I hope you have a tremendous eternity. I hope you get all this straightened out and accept Jesus Christ as your Savior, because the Bible is true. And not only, the Bible says the scoffers are ignorant of the creation and the flood, they're ignorant of the coming judgment. And there's a judgment coming, whether you believe it or not. I'm trying to help you get ready for that. So Jesus died on the cross to pay for your sins, and if you'll accept his payment, he'll move inside and make a whole new person out of you. It's wonderful. Come visit Dinosaur Adventureland, Adam. I'll give you a tour, show you around the place, and we'll get you converted.
If you could pay for the flight, that would be lovely.
Can't do that. You get here and we'll feed you and house you.
Amen, Dr. Hovind. Okay, thank you so much, gentlemen. Praise, if you want to have a final word there and shut her down, brother.
Yeah, this was awesome. I appreciate Dr. Hovind coming on, and Adam. It was a pleasure for me, and I would like to do this more often. These type of debates are really interesting and fascinating. So I want to say thanks to everyone coming in here and participating in the chat. And I want to say God bless and see you later.
For all those who appreciate the work that we're doing here on Standing for Truth, please hit that subscribe button, because we are just getting started.